lights are up, the stage is set. You ain't seen nothing like this yet. Yeah. Grab your friends, let's make some noise. Feel the rush, let's jump for joy. Dance around and lose control. Welcome to the Mama Bear Show. Welcome, welcome, here we go. Feel the magic, feel the glow. Laugh and sing and dance along. Welcome to the Mama Bear Show. Everybody raise your hands. Feel the rhythm with the band. From the start until the end. Every moment, every trend. Feel the love, it's in the air. Music lifts you everywhere. Every smile and every cheer. Mama Bear is finally here. Welcome, welcome, here we go. Feel the magic, feel the glow. Laugh and sing and dance along. Welcome to the Mama Bear Show. Welcome, welcome, here we go. Feel the magic, feel the glow. Laugh and sing and dance along. Welcome to the Mama Bear Show. Everybody raise your hands. Feel the rhythm with the band. From the start until the end. Every moment, every trend. Yeah. Feel the love, it's in the air. Music lifts you everywhere. Every smile and every cheer. Mama Bear is finally here. Welcome, welcome, here we go. Feel the magic, feel the glow. Laugh and sing and dance along. Welcome to the Mama Bear Show. Welcome to the Mama Bear Show. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. How are you today? There is an interesting hearing going on, and I thought I would bring it to you. Hearing on weaponization of the federal government. So I thought I would bring it to you live for you to watch.
Security clearance for 20 years. They reauthorize your security clearance. Something else happened that next
day. It is an interesting
Your email
hearing.
got forwarded to the security division and to Mr. Beltry. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then 19 days later, Mr. Beltry opened an investigation into your security clearance status. I get all those facts right, Mr. Levitt? Is that what happened with Marcus in those 2 days?
That I'd like
and 19
you guys
days
watch
later?
it.
Yes, except for from what we can tell, Veltri directed that day that it be opened. It's just that the underlings under him didn't carry that out until 19 days later.
Yeah. And he directed, they look into a guy, decorated Marine veteran, held a security clearance for 20. They look into him because because Mr. Allen said there's a chance the FBI leadership hasn't been square with us. Right?
That's correct.
And he cited a New York Times article. They thought the same thing. And oh, by the way, there's the history that we all know about. FBI spied on the president's campaign, lied to the FISA court, investigated parents at school board meetings, said if you're a pro-life Catholic, you're an extremist. So we got all that history, and he gets investigated for that because he simply questioned the leadership, went through the appropriate channels. Mr. Horowitz, did Mr. Veltri and the people at the security division follow the standard process?
They did not.
They did not. In fact, isn't it true that, Mr. Levitt, isn't it true that some of the people, I think you cited 4 of them in your statement, 4 people, the initial investigator, the second investigator, the first adjudicator, and another adjudicator all got reassigned. They all agreed that Mr. Allen should keep his security clearance. This investigation shouldn't have happened, and they get reassigned or something happens to them.
4 of them all did not recommend that his clearance be, that there be a negative action on it. 2 of them were reassigned.
2 were reassigned. Some of them are whistleblowers now, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Man, if that's not political, I don't know what is. Oh, and they didn't stop there. They piled on. They also said, Mr. Allen, he questioned whether he should get the vaccine or not. They came after him for that. Is that right, Mr. Levitt?
Yes.
And then they went after his faith. Direct attack on the First Amendment. Because he's a Christian, because he's a Catholic, because he takes his faith seriously. Oh my goodness. We got to take his security clearance away from him, even though he served our country, decorated Marine, and held a security clearance for 20 years. That sure looks political to me, Inspector General Horowitz. Does it look political to you?
Well, Congressman, as I said earlier, we've seen issues with the FBI and how it's treated whistleblowers, frankly, across the spectrum. And I agree with you, it's very concerning that would be done here.
We know they're political because while all this is going on, they used the questionnaire. Isn't that right, Mr. Levitt? Isn't that right? They used this questionnaire to people they wanted to snitch on folks like Marcus Allen. They gave him a questionnaire.
Those were used in the case of a handful of employees. And I know that Mr. Horowitz's office is looking at that. I think it's important to note that the questionnaire wasn't the only thing, right? That these questions were asked across
I'm talking
the board.
about that, the way they piled on to go after
Yeah.
Mr. Allen and keep his security clearance and keep his pay from him for 27 months. And they did the same thing to Garrett O'Boyle. And what that has meant, as you indicated in your testimony, what that has meant to his family and Mr. O'Boyle's family. And this questionnaire said, did anyone ever vocalize support for President Trump? All right, you're allowed to say things about the President of the United States when you work in the FBI, aren't you, Mr. Horowitz?
I'm sorry.
You're allowed to say you support a president.
Oh,
You're allowed to say that in the FBI.
Absolutely, those questions are highly inappropriate.
And you're allowed to decide what kind of health decisions you're going to make with your own body, right?
Correct.
Those shouldn't be grounds for saying you're somehow disloyal to the country, but that's what they did. Highly inappropriate questions being asked of witnesses during security clearance investigations. That's your testimony, right, Mr. Horowitz?
That's correct.
And he got reinstated just recently. Marcus Allen you got reinstated, right, Marcus?
Yes, sir.
Why haven't they given you your money?
I am not aware why it's taking them 4 months to cut a check for all the back pay. I have no idea why it's taking that long.
They put you through pure hell for 27 months, falsely accused you. They go through the process. 4 people get reassigned because they agree with you, but the politics of Mr. Beltry, who, oh, by the way, as Mr. Levitt pointed out, is now running the second assassination investigation on President Trump in Miami. I find that just astonishing. And they won't pay you.
Right. We're still waiting for the payout.
When was the
now.
final agreement? When was the final settlement with the FBI? What was the date, Mr. Levitt?
June 1st.
Well, they've had time. Doesn't take that long to write a check, for goodness sake. So he's still in waiting. That's how our FBI treats a good man who has served our country for 20 plus years. It's ridiculous. And yet the Democrats say there's no weaponization. You got to be kidding me. My time has expired. I now recognize the gentlelady from California.
So you want to talk about weaponization of the Department of Justice? Let's talk about it. Because sadly for Republicans, weaponization tends to be in the eye of the beholder. They delight in talking about false allegations of politicized attacks on Republicans. But I want to talk about the real weaponization, the one that would come from a second Trump-led Department of Justice. We are already watching in horror as women across the country lose their autonomy, their dignity, and even their lives because of draconian abortion bans in dozens of states, which Trump delights in. He brags about choosing the Supreme Court justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. And if we get into a second Trump presidency, the weaponization we are witnessing will be orchestrated by the DOJ at Trump's demand. Trump's Project 2025 mandate for leadership calls for some of the most restrictive abortion and healthcare bans imaginable. In short, it lays out the path to eradicate reproductive healthcare and women's privacy. It calls for the CDC and HHS to closely monitor and report on individual women's health and abortions, keeping track of when women travel across state lines to seek reproductive health care and at what stage of their pregnancy they're in when they do. And alarmingly, it calls for the DOJ to criminally punish abortion providers who distribute abortion medication through the mail. Mr. Kirshner, one of the proposals I mentioned is for the CDC to track women's movements to access abortions across state lines. The mandate also calls for the president to be able to direct the investigations and litigation by the FBI and the DOJ. So hypothetically, even though that CDC-related part of the proposal didn't mention DOJ prosecutions, there are risks that a far-right government outlined in Trump's Project 2025, collecting that data, could weaponize it against the women seeking health care in a criminal context. Is that correct? So in other words, it would be possible to take CDC data about women who have sought abortions and direct the DOJ and the FBI to target those individuals. Is that correct?
It is, yes. Tracking women who are pregnant, it's horribly reminiscent of, tracking and hunting animals. It really
It's like stalking.
endangers people.
It's like stalking, let's be honest. Tracking the movements of women. The mandate also calls for the enforcement of restrictions on DOJ grants to comply with conservative ideology, such as prohibiting sanctuary cities from receiving federal funding. Would it be possible then that DOJ grants could be conditioned on jurisdictions limiting abortion or other healthcare access?
Under Project 2025, it seems like the sky is the limit.
Thank you. These extreme restrictions are far from the only alarming agenda points in Trump's Project 2025. The document also calls for dismantling the Department of Education, which former President Trump claimed he would do during a rally in Pennsylvania just this week. It calls for allowing business administration, and if any of these proposals were to be challenged in court, Trump's corrupt Justice Department, led by loyalists, would defend these awful provisions. Mr. Kirshner, if any of these offensive proposals are challenged, they will be defended by the Department of Justice. What could be the result if the DOJ is more loyal to President Trump than to the Constitution?
They could decline to take up challenges, or they could decide to take up challenges not based on the rule of law, not based on, what is right for the American people, but based on the whims and preferences of a president.
And Mr. Horowitz, my final question is for you. Would we want agents at the FBI or any other government agency who would be seeking to promote any cause that might conflict with the Constitution, whether that be religious or ideological or loyalty to an individual rather than the Constitution?
We would not. We swear our employees in with an oath to abide by the Constitution, the laws of this country.
So does it seem like a great idea to scrap our complete civil service and pack every federal agency with people that are loyal more to an individual than to the Constitution, or more to religious ideology, or more to some other kind of ideology?
I think over the years, Congress has found where the appropriate balance is between having non-career officials and political appointees leading agencies on policy issues, and having a career civil service.
Thank you.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The
back to
gentleman from
Councilman.
Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
President Trump has never read Project 2025, much less adopted it. Unlike the viewpoint adopted by the sitting vice president, which is that we should have taxpayer-funded sex change operations for illegal aliens in prison. And I try to be a little open-minded when I hear a provocative argument, and I just sort of wonder, when would I be in favor of taxpayer-funded sex change operations for the illegal aliens? And maybe if it was mandatory, maybe if it wasn't optional, but mandatory, it would be a pretty substantial deterrent at the border. But to the matter at hand, Mr. Allen, it's good to see you again. You came last year and you told us about these terrible things the Department of Justice was doing to you. And you've testified today, you still don't think the Department of Justice has treated whistleblowers like yourself and others fairly. Is that your testimony?
That's correct. The treatment is unfair.
Do you agree with that assessment, Mr. Horowitz?
As I said in my testimony, Congressman, I think putting someone like Mr. Allen on unpaid leave for 2+ years is unfair while you're
Okay.
trying to adjudicate.
Yeah, no,
There
I get
needs to
that.
be a process here that
Well, the
happens promptly.
process was to punish these people and to make an example of them. That's obvious to everyone. They saw improper actions at the FBI and DOJ. They blew the whistle on it, and then the process was the punishment, and it was the point. I think that's how Mr. Allen feels. Is it?
Correct. The process in this
Right.
instance definitely felt like the punishment.
Yeah, so they've done it to you, they've done it to others. Mr. Horowitz says it shouldn't have been done. And so now I want to be a little reflective about this with Congress. Mr. Allen, you've seen since you have given us this testimony, us continue to pass continuing resolutions that put no consequence on the DOJ or the FBI for what they've done to you and your colleagues. Do you think Congress has appropriately protected whistleblowers?
I do not, Congressman, and I think the policy recommendations can be put forward that there can be bipartisan support for to protect whistleblowers going forward in the future.
Absolutely. I mean this in no way as a partisan critique. Matter of fact, it's a bipartisan critique that we all own. Because we see the evidence that you get mistreated. We hear from the experts like Mr. Horowitz that this is totally off book. It's obvious to anyone with a brain they're doing it to hurt you and to make an example out of you. And what do? We just sign the check and we just send it over. You know what we should put in any continuing resolution? That until you get paid and until the rest of the whistleblowers get their back pay, maybe the FBI director doesn't get his paycheck. Maybe the attorney general shouldn't get his paycheck. Maybe the FBI director shouldn't get the use of the private jet that he likes to fly around the country on so much. You know, they enjoy all of the accoutrements of their position, and you end up screwed. And we're okay with it, apparently. If any member who votes for these continuing resolutions is voting to perpetuate the punishment that has been instituted on the whistleblowers. And while we want to talk about the weaponization of the Justice Department, rightfully so, we write the check for it and we underwrite the debt for it. And it is sickening to me. Mr. Horowitz, I got a few questions for you since we got you here. Now, the CIGI is the Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, right?
That's right.
And you're the past chair?
I was the chair from 2015 through 2020.
Does it have any binding legal authority?
In terms of, I mean, it was created by Congress as an agency.
Yeah, but does it have like legal authority to issue subpoenas that it can compel?
It has not been given subpoena authority.
Okay, so what I wonder is where this group SIGI, I'll just call it the Integrity Committee, like what happens when they start interfering in the work of IGs to expose corruption? Who adjudicates that?
So Congress actually created the Integrity Committee again back in 2008, gave it its authorities. The Integrity Committee puts forth a set of policies and procedures. It's required to provide them to Congress. That's the mechanism.
Yeah, but in a state of conflict, right, where you got an IG working to expose corruption, and then you've got the SIGI hassling the IG, who resolves that?
Well,
because I mean, nobody in the SIGI is not, the head of it's not like confirmed by the Senate, but IGs are confirmed by the Senate.
Yeah, and it probably in part depends on, there are two types of IGs. There's presidentially nominated Senate confirmed IGs. There's then agency IGs. For presidentially nominated Senate confirmed IGs, ultimately it's up to the president to decide what he wants, because the report goes to the president.
And the presidential power, not to get into a constitutional, a regression here, but the presidential power is vested in the IG, not in this administrative committee, right?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Connolly, but would you indulge me to just clarify something?
Certainly.
Inspector Horowitz, you are Senate confirmed and you were the head of SIGI, is that correct?
Correct.
I just wanted to make it clear.
Yeah, I was Senate confirmed for DOJ IG.
Right.
I think the point was that the chair of SIGI doesn't have to be Senate confirmed. I happen to be Senate confirmed sitting in that position.
Thank you. I just want to make that clear. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Kirshner, and by the way, I apologize, at least on behalf of this side of the committee, for a disparagement characterizing your testimony. I don't think we should ever do that in a committee. We don't have to agree.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. I'm from New Jersey, so I've suffered worse.
I'm from Boston originally. We don't like that. Mr. Kirshner, Mr. Levitt's client, Garrett O'Brien, posted the names and personally identifying information, including parts of home addresses, for 4 current or former FBI officials. In August, Kyle Seraphim, who has hosted multiple podcasts with Mr. O'Boyle, tweeted, and I quote, "The people who left Garrett O'Boyle's family and my family homeless should experience what guys like us are prepared to do to evil." unquote. Mr. Kirshner, you served in the FBI. What's wrong with identifying FBI officials' partial addresses, hometowns, personal information, and making a threat? You may justify it because you think they're engaged in evil, but that's a direct threat from the way I read it. What could go wrong with that kind of thing? And isn't that the kind of threat of violence that I think, ought to be examined by a weaponization committee as opposed to what we're doing here today? Your view?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I wasn't with the FBI, though. I was with the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office, right up the street there. But I'll tell you, I worked closely with the FBI, the Washington Field Office, directly across the street from my former office. And, we moved heaven and earth to prevent personal information from getting out about our witnesses, about people we were investigating, so as they, to prevent them from being unfairly perhaps smeared with an investigation that didn't result in an indictment. And, I had my fair share of witnesses killed in Washington, D.C., because their information got out. They were labeled as snitches. And then I had to sit with the families of a witness and talk about, how very sorry I was for what happened to them because that information.
So while we're bemoaning the alleged mistreatment of certain individuals, including some here today, which may not be true, we're escalating it with actual threats that could lead to violence, even death. Is that correct?
You endanger the lives of folks when you put that kind of information out into the public square.
Certain irony when we're worried about weaponization, while meanwhile some of the people we purport to be advocating for are engaged in this kind of activity threatening FBI agents. Mr. Horowitz, there have been allegations made that the FBI has weaponized security clearance revocations to target and root out conservatives at the Bureau. Have you found any such evidence of a broad pattern of trying to target conservatives and revoking their security clearances?
We have not made such a finding.
Have you made any findings that the FBI security clearance process targets Christians?
We have not made such a finding.
Have you made any findings that the FBI leadership is targeting military veterans?
We've not made such a finding.
Have you made any findings that Jeffrey Veltri, now the special agent in charge of FBI's Miami field office, was biased against conservatives?
We haven't made any findings with regard to Mr. Veltri.
And have you made any findings that the FBI wrongly revoked the clearance of former special agent Garrett O'Boyle?
I'm not going to speak to any particular case because we have matters ongoing. And so as I'm answering those questions, I'm talking about what we've done as of today.
We'll stipulate that. But would it be fair to summarize your answers to the previous questions? You haven't found any pattern of ideological or religious bias by the FBI with respect to those issues. Is that correct?
That is correct. What we found, as I mentioned earlier, in our past work is, frankly, issues on occasion with FBI and, frankly, other law enforcement agencies and other parts of the department acting inappropriately with regard to whistleblowers.
That's different than a pattern.
That's different than a pattern.
That's different than a pattern. Finally, Mr. Kirshner, as a child of the 60s, I find it almost humorous to hear characterizations of the FBI as this hotbed of liberal, if not leftist ideology. I'm going to give you the last word on that. It seems to me the FBI has always been a fairly conservative culture and certainly a right of center political bent if there was one. What's your view?
Yes, sir. And I had a lot of knockdown, drag out discussions with lots of FBI agents over the course of an investigation, whether we should indict, who we should indict, what we should indict. But I never believed any of it was born of politics or their ideological beliefs or preferences. It never was, in my experience. That's why I find this topic a little curious.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'll now not recognize myself. Inspector Horowitz, would it be fair to characterize you as one of the institutionalists of the IG, long-serving, and a career that, without patting yourself overly on the back, but deservedly, that has been about promoting the responsible behavior of the IG and the performance of their duty?
Congressman, that's certainly how I viewed myself. My responsibilities through my time here as IG.
Well, that's how this committee and other committees of the Congress view you for your years of service, and I want to thank you. This is a difficult hearing because many people perhaps would like to make this not about weaponization. But in your many years of experience, the personal actions of individuals, for whatever reason, including an unstated bias, leads to bad conduct, including HR wrongdoing. Is that correct?
That's correct. And one of the hardest jobs we have, as you know, from the work you've worked on, I've worked on, is understanding and figuring out motives.
And you often never know the motive. You only know that the action was inconsistent with policy, law, and the like.
That's correct. But we do our best, for example, in the Fast and Furious work, the FISA work, others, to look at as much email, text messages, instant messages, et cetera, to try and understand whether there was evidence of motive or what the evidence of motive was.
So leaving motive out for a moment, in the case of the way the pulling and withholding of these clearances was done, is that clearly inconsistent with policy, procedures, tradition, and the fair treatment of an employee?
Actually, it actually was somewhat, in many ways, consistent with the policies, practice, and procedures, which is why I think there are several policy issues that are important to talk about in terms of reforms. And I know the submissions here have raised some of them.
So, you're an attorney in addition to other things. The law is not always about fairness.
Unfortunately, that's true.
And would you characterize that this is an example where, even if marginally supported by law and regulation, it is by no means a fair way to treat somebody?
I agree. I think, as I've said, it was consistent with policy to allow someone like Mr. Allen to be out of his job on unpaid leave for more than 2 years and try and fight that process.
So not only does Congress need to find a way to prevent these unfairness, but we also suffer from the fact that this can be done for no reason or for an unknown reason. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I think that is some of the key policy issues that are here before all of you, which is Mr. Allen had an ability to challenge this, as limited as it was, because he was alleging a whistleblower retaliation. He wouldn't have that same opportunity, but for the fact he was alleging retaliation for whistleblower.
Mr. Issa, can I add to that?
Yes, please.
Mr. Horowitz is talking about the procedures of protecting, so going through and appealing. But I think it's important to remember that substantively, this whole process started because Mr. Allen made a protected disclosure, and several of the things that Mr. Horowitz.
And I want to get to that. Going back to whistleblower retaliation, under the intent of our whistleblower statute, we intend to protect a whistleblower normally from all retaliation, including any loss of pay. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So had the agency made what would have been a finding of whistleblower on the front end, notwithstanding, whistleblowers don't have to be right. They just have to be whistleblowers. Had they made the finding that was clear, then he would not have lost a day's pay because they would have treated the pay in some way as a whistleblower.
Right. As long as they thought he had a reasonable belief in what he said, they should not have taken a personnel action against him.
Okay, so in a little bit of a circular item here, and again, I'm staying away from motive for a moment. Certainly the tools were available to not deny him 1 day of pay, and ultimately the resolution is someday in the future, not yet, not after 4 months, he will get made whole in theory in pay, but in fact, it never had to be that way, and the judgment used in this case is suspect.
Yeah, and that is exactly why, Congressman, we put out the management alert we did, to point out the fact that you don't need to put someone on unpaid leave while you review an allegation against the person. You can find other opportunities for them, other positions they can continue to work in, even if you think they shouldn't have the clearance.
Thank you. Thanks for making that clear. We now go to Congresswoman Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses. So once again, mega Republicans are here talking about something that quite frankly seems to just be made up. And I think I want to just stick to talking, Mr. Kirschner, because I know you've already talked some about Project 2025, and we've talked about several aspects of it. But one thing that has caught my eye, of course, is that Project 2025 is filled with anti-immigrant proposals that will continue to perpetuate cycles of racist policies, unnecessary inhumane detentions of human beings, and ineffective and dangerous border policies. The project calls to dismantle asylum, to militarize our border, that's at page 555, and also to pursue the promulgation of every rule related to immigration that was issued during the Trump administration, that's at page 568, and to challenge any checks and balances against the president's authority over immigration, page 568. So once again, he wants complete authority, and he being Donald Trump. The project's mandate for leadership takes particularly aim at sanctuary cities. You know, one of the things about sanctuary cities that is always mentioned is that victims of crime that happen to be immigrants, you know, feel comfortable in being able to complain or if they're witnesses to a crime. So Mr. Kirschner, you've served as a prosecutor for 30 years. I've been a lawyer and a judge. We understand the importance of law and order and holding violent criminals accountable. So what would be the dangers if this mandate were to go into effect and they would attempt to end sanctuary cities? You know, the bigger question is there's no definition of sanctuary cities. It's all a label that's been used for years. What would this do to the crime rate in some of our cities?
You know, I think it could potentially increase it. If you deter people from reporting that they have been victims of violent crime for fear of what will happen to them if they report that victimization, all you're doing is creating an enormous class of folk who are going to continue to be victimized, and that can grow. Maybe they will then commit crimes themselves because the whole thing begins to operate outside the rule of law. So, you know, I think, you know, those kind of approaches present real challenges and could increase crime when it sounds like it's designed to decrease crime.
So instead of getting rid of gangs, they'll probably create the formation of more gangs.
It could. And, you know, and I see also in Project 2025 on page 555 that it recommends that they use active duty military personnel to enforce civilian law, which I remember being taught in Army law school years ago. That's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. So, you know, none of this seems to be all that well thought out.
Right. And then another priority in the mandate's proposal for the Department of Justice, my colleagues, especially Representative Lynch, have already alluded to all this. The mandate reads, and I'll read it again because it's worth repeating. It's at page 569. The next conservative administration must make every effort to obtain the resources to support a vast expansion of the number of appointees in every office and component across the department, especially in the Civil Rights Division, the FBI, and the Executive Office for Immigration Review. So just a complete dismantling of those offices. So in essence, this proposal is to strip the department, including the immigration enforcement, of career civil servants who, of course, you know, would lead probably, you know, if they're concerned about Mr. Allen not having, you know, 2 years of pay, which of course I agree, it's concerning. But imagine people who are loyal not to the rule of law, not loyal to the Constitution, have no guidelines because it's all been dismantled. They could probably, anyone that appears before them, they could probably suspend all of them for 2 years and give them no pay because there would be no rules. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and if you have supervisors who are not, you know, making decisions based on the rule of law, the facts and the evidence, but political considerations, you know, my supervisors could tell me, you know, investigate this crime, don't investigate that crime. And if that, you know, determination is not based exclusively on the facts and the law and the victim and the protection of the community, we're going to get in real trouble.
So a case like Mr. Allen could be multiplied into thousands if there's no rules and no regulation, and there wouldn't be an inspector general
It
to
could be.
review anything.
And let me go on record as saying, I support whistleblowers.
Absolutely.
And retaliation against them needs to be stamped out. So I just,
Absolutely.
we have this thing called an adoptive admission. So when somebody says, I believe or don't believe something, I just feel compelled to put on the record what I actually believe.
Right. Well, thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Inspector General Horowitz, over the past 3 years, I've questioned FBI Director Wray and Attorney General Merrick Garland about the federal assets, such as confidential human sources that were present on January 6th at the Capitol. And they have continuously stonewalled me. We've got no answers whatsoever about this from them. Now, you announced that you were going to do a review of the DOJ response and preparation, mainly preparation, I think, for January 6th. When did you start that review? When did you announce that review?
We announced it in 2021, but we ended up pausing it because of the ongoing criminal cases consistent with how we perform our work. We reinitiated it last year, and I'm in the process of reviewing a draft of the report.
So 3.5 years ago, it was announced that you'd be doing this review, and we still don't have the review, do we?
No, as I said, the reason is we paused the review because of the ongoing criminal work that would, consistent with our practice, we don't interfere with ongoing criminal investigations.
So,
We seek
but
not
now
to.
that you've restarted it, do you have evidence of the number of confidential human sources that were operating on the Capitol grounds on January 6th?
Our report will include the information in that regard.
Can you tell us today how many there were? Were there more than 100?
I'm not in a position to say that, both because it's in draft form and we have not gone through the classification review. And so I need to be careful on what I
So we're
say.
4 years in. The reason to do these reports, I think, is so we don't make this, if there were any mistakes, not to make the same mistakes again, but we are just weeks away from an inauguration. We're 4 years, almost 4 years into this report. When is it going to be released?
It's certainly my hope and expectation, although I don't control this entirely because it has to go through a classification review, but certainly in the next couple of months is my hope.
Do you think, is there any consideration for the election about the release of this report? Would you delay it in order to not release it right before the election?
At this point, given the process that has to play out in terms of classification review and all of that, I'm not making any, I don't have to make any judgment about that. We're still, that still has to go on. Just to give you a sense of it, when I did the Pfizer review,
You're saying it's not even going to be done in time for before the election?
it doesn't, I doubt it would be done in time for the election.
Is it going to be done before the inauguration?
That is certainly my hope. And
It's your hope.
plan.
We're 4 years into it, and we know what we do know is you're going to expose that there were confidential human sources at the Capitol. Can you tell us today how many went into the Capitol?
I'll have that information in the report. I'm not able to speak to information in there, both because it's in draft and we get a response from the department and the FBI,
Okay.
but also because I don't know yet what's classified and not classified.
So if they broke the law, if they went into the Capitol, which we pretty much know there were confidential human sources who went into the Capitol and right there alongside of everybody else, wouldn't they need to follow DOJ CHS protocols? And do you know if those were followed?
They should follow CHS protocols. And again, we'll include that information in the report.
Do you know how many were reimbursed for travel?
As I sit here, I don't recall the number.
You
But I
don't
wouldn't-
recall, or you won't tell us?
Well, and if I did know it, I wouldn't be in a position to tell you because we still have to go through.
We're 4 years
Actual
into this.
accuracy
You're supposed to be the organization that goes and gets these answers when the FBI and the DOJ stonewall Congress. But I feel like, we're 4 years into this. We're not even going to get this information you're telling us now before the election, and maybe not even before the next inauguration. How would we make any corrections or without that information? I want to move on to something else. We've got FBI's failed investigation of the January 6th pipe bomb.
Are you looking into that at all?
We've had discussion, I know, Congressman, about it, and we have followed up, and I can speak to you about that.
I mean, they keep saying it's an ongoing investigation, but they've got no leads, no suspects. They've lost information. They've lost evidence. They can't find evidence. Secret Service deleted all of its texts on January 6th. Steve D'Antuono, the guy in charge of Washington, D.C. field office, says that the cell phone data that could have been used to find the bomber was corrupted. And now we just found out, I found out from another inspector general, and I want to submit this for the record.
Objection.
Yeah. I asked him, do you have the footage, the video footage? Does the FBI have the video footage of the DNC on January 6th? And he tells me when he asked the FBI for the video footage, they don't even have video footage of the DNC that we know was created on January 6th. It's almost, so it's almost as if they don't want to know. Can you rule out that there were any confidential human sources involved in the whole pipe bomb thing on January 6th?
I'm not, I'd have to go back, Congressman, and refresh myself on what information we've gathered to date on that. I don't know as I sit here.
Okay, that would be a huge revelation.
But I'm happy to come.
I think we should get that and get it public before the election. I yield back.
A gentleman is back. I'm just struck by the irony, the fact that the very email that they went after Mr. Allen about was on this subject, and we're not going to get an answer to it until after the election, potentially after the inauguration. I find the irony astounding. And it's not Mr. Horowitz's fault. It's the folks of the Justice Department who are taking their time with this report. I appreciate the gentleman's question. Now yield to the gentleman from New York or California?
John, you want
California. New York, excuse me. I'll do whatever Ms. Plaskett says. Okay, New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here we are again for another hearing about the same topic. And I want to say I appreciate the concerns about how the FBI addresses and investigates whistleblowers or retaliates against whistleblowers. And we've had a number of hearings on this in this committee. And Mr. Horowitz, I'm glad you are looking into it. That is your job, and that's what you should do. But let's be real. This is the weaponization of the federal government subcommittee. Whistleblower retaliation is peanuts compared to a future president using the power of his office to imprison his political adversaries simply because they oppose him. That is the ultimate weaponization of the federal government. And we don't have to question whether or not Donald Trump will do this in the future, because we know how this story plays out. We've seen it, and he's done it in the past. I want to introduce an article from last Sunday's New York Times entitled, "As President Trump demanded investigations of foes, he often got them. He has threatened to target his perceived enemies if elected again. A look at his time in the White House shows how readily he could do so." Let's just go through some of the things that Donald Trump did when he was president the first time. James Comey testified that Trump asked him for a pledge of loyalty and then requested that Comey drop the investigation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Comey refused. Trump fired him. Trump also fired Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe because he oversaw an investigation that Donald Trump didn't like, just days before McCabe would have earned his full retirement pension. Trump then demanded that the IRS investigate Comey and McCabe, among others. Well, that's not all. At Trump's direction, the Justice Department dropped its case against former National Security Advisor Flynn, who had pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Mr. Kirshner, in your 30 years of experience, are you aware of any other situation where the Department of Justice withdrew a case after a defendant had admitted to the conduct under oath in court?
I am not.
Let's move on. Donald Trump pressured overtly the DOJ to reverse its sentencing recommendation for Roger Stone. After Stone threatened to cooperate against Donald Trump, Trump granted him clemency.
John Durham wasted millions of dollars on a baseless and fruitless investigation into the origins of the Russia investigation because Donald Trump demanded it. And it got so bad that Mr. Durham's number 2 resigned in protest to Durham's plan, pressured by Bill Barr and Donald Trump to publish an interim report on the investigation shortly before the 2020 election in gross violation of DOJ policies. That's not all. Trump tried to install Jeffrey Clark as Attorney General because he acknowledged to the president that he would do his bidding and fraudulently try to help him overturn the election. But this is the one that really gets to the nub of this. And Mr. Levitt, we're talking about First Amendment, infringement on First Amendment rights that you are alleging has happened to these FBI agents. You would agree, would you not, that writing a book is protected speech under the First Amendment?
Sure.
So let me just give you a hypothetical scenario. Somebody pleads guilty to a crime. He's sentenced and designated to serve his sentence at home. He is asked by the Department of Justice to sign an agreement saying that he would not write a book. He refuses to do that. As a result of his refusal, the Department of Justice throws him back into jail in solitary confinement. Is that, in your mind, the weaponization of the Department of Justice to infringe upon First Amendment rights?
I'm not a First Amendment lawyer, Mr. Goldman.
Well, you said this is all about a First Amendment infringement.
Well,
Why are you testifying about that if you're not an expert? The answer, because my time is running out, excuse me, the answer, because my time is running out, is that actually happened by Donald Trump to Michael Cohen. A judge intervened immediately, reversed the decision because it's a gross violation of the First Amendment. It is a gross abuse of power of the Department of Justice, and Mr. Cohen was let out. But this is who now has complete immunity to do this as much as he wants without the guardrails of Don McGahn or John Kelly to stop him from doing it. This is going to be the danger of the weaponization of the federal government. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, your office published advisory memo 24-067 entitled "The Justice Department's Compliance with Whistleblower Protections for Employees with Security Clearance," and noted how you found that the DOJ was not in compliance with whistleblower protections for employees with a clearance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What policies exactly did the DOJ fail to follow?
So the law requires for suspension and revocations of security clearance that the department have an appeal process allowing, after 1 year of suspension, to come to the Inspector General and appeal that process. That was not in place at the time.
Does it concern you that the DOJ, that certain DOJ components like the FBI indefinitely suspend employees without pay for the duration of a security investigation and review process?
It does, which is one of the issues we also raised in that management memo.
What is the average length of time for one of those investigations?
So we found in the report that for the 106 employees that we looked at over a 5-year period who'd been suspended for more than 6 months, that the average was 527 days. So about 17 and a half months.
So about a year and a half, roughly.
Year and a half.
So in your work, have you seen similar delays or similar lengths of time in other agencies?
We have within the department in other components, law enforcement components.
What concerns me too, at least with the pay issue, the DOJ and FBI's current policy forces employees to remain in kind of an indefinite state of limbo without pay.
That's exactly right. And that is the concern, Congressman, that goes actually beyond whistleblowers. Mr. Allen ultimately was able to get a settlement because he was a whistleblower alleging retaliation. But that same issue applies to people who don't have a whistleblower claim, but have nonetheless had the security clearance pulled.
I just think it's remarkable to me. I mean, just to hear Mr. Allen's testimony earlier about what he and his family went through, pulling out retirement, life savings, things like that, just to stay afloat. And fortunately for him, he was able to settle, but he's he might be the exception and not the rule. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. Most people or many people we've seen have resigned or retired rather than wait 2+ years.
Can I add one clarification on the settlement? It was not because of his whistleblower claim, or the settlement's related to that, but the restoration of his security clearance was because of just an appeal of the revocation. So that was not tied to the whistleblower claim or to the settlement for the back pay. The FBI explicitly said, we're not giving you back this clearance just because there's some settlement. They make an independent security determination. They determined he was entitled to it.
Thank you. Furthermore, the memo found that DOJ policy doesn't hold the legal requirement to the extent practical that permits an individual to retain their employment status while their security clearance is in review. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does the DOJ's failure to follow this policy concern you?
It does, which is what led us to issue the management alert. The department did respond and has since changed its policies so that there is that 1-year appeal. The other thing that they've done, which is not required currently, but is certainly something that I think Congress should consider, is requiring components, Department of Law Enforcement components in particular, to consider whether there are paid jobs people can be in without the clearances, even if a clearance suspension is warranted, so that you don't have this situation where someone gets put out unpaid leave or paid leave not working either, which has been another problem, by the way, at the department over the years, is putting people on paid leave for extended periods of time, so they're getting a paycheck without having to work.
Based on your office's findings, do you think that the senior leadership within the DOJ or the FBI were aware that their policies did not follow federal legal standards?
I actually, my sense is they were not aware, because when we started this process and went to them, they did not seem to know about this issue, or weren't aware that their policy fell short on that issue, I should say.
Your office made 4 recommendations to the DOJ to address the concerns cited in your memo. 1, what were those for the record? And 2, to your knowledge, what steps has the DOJ taken to implement those recommendations?
So the 4 recommendations were: 1, to make sure there was this 1-year appeal process; 2, to notify employees of their right to this process, because obviously you can have a process, but you shouldn't have to have an employee rummage through a lot of policies to find it. 3rd, when there is a suspension, look to see if there are positions they can go into where they can continue to maintain their position while performing work, even without the suspension, if that's the plan. And then 4th, put in place a review to make sure that these are being done timely. And so, because you don't want a situation either where if they can find another job with a security clearance suspension pulled, that they somehow indefinitely stay in that other job. You want them to have that resolved. If they shouldn't be in the job, they should leave, right? Then if it was an unfair suspension, they should be put back to their old job.
And have they taken those recommendations?
They have. And I think very importantly is the requirement that they report regularly to department leadership as to why that hasn't occurred in a timely way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for the witnesses, thank you for your testimony. I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. Most of the focus has been on the Department of Justice, as is appropriate. But most of this is history. My concern is tomorrow. My concern is what might be in our future. Project 2025 is a roadmap that the Republican administration may use should Trump win the election. And in Project 2025, there are many things to be concerned about, most of which happen to do with the weaponization of the government, the whole of government, to carry out an agenda. I want to focus on one part of Project 2025, which really hasn't been discussed much, but really should be paid attention to. And that is the redesign of our national security apparatus, putting all senior military officers and career intelligence officers through a loyalty test. And what that might mean for our nation should that come to pass. We can debate whether it would come to pass or not. The election will have something to do with that, but also the willingness or the unwillingness of the new administration to undertake that. What would a loyalty test mean for the military? Wouldn't be their ability to conduct the necessary programs for our national defense, but rather their loyalty to the president and the president's agenda, which may or may not have anything to do with national security. We have some history here that might be useful. For example, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff would not carry out President Trump's political agenda. Certainly willing to carry out the military national security agenda, but not the military agenda. And that earned Chief of Staff General Mark Milley the opportunity for the president to call for his execution. Now, if Project 2025 is the roadmap for the Trump administration, and the Trump administration demands a loyalty test for our senior military generals, colonels, and career intelligence officers, what does that mean for the nation? Posse comitatus is often used, but I believe this committee has from time to time taken a look at the emergency powers of the president, which basically can waive nearly every law. So we may wind up, given Project 2025 and the loyalty tests that seem to be embedded in it, with a military that is capable of involvement in domestic affairs and an intelligence community that's supposed to be looking outside of this nation, involved domestically. So the combination of the current very long list of emergency powers that the president has, together with a loyal military hierarchy and a loyal career intelligence community that is loyal to the president, not necessarily loyal to the Constitution or to the history of our democracy. What could it mean to our nation? A military that is used domestically for political purposes, an intelligence community that is looking inward. Project 2025 presents a very serious challenge. 5 seconds. I'd like all of you to ponder what this would mean. Is it a problem? Mr. Kirshner.
It is, and what I'm reminded of, Representative, is after I graduated law school and I was sent to Army Law School, the JAG school on the campus of the University of Virginia, one thing that was drilled into our heads is you must obey lawful orders, but equally important, I would say more important, you must disobey unlawful orders. Project 2025 would wipe out that second command, which is more important than the first command, and the danger can't be overstated.
I appreciate the forbearance of the chair for that 25 seconds.
Gentleman's time, the gentleman yields back, and the chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davids.
I thank the chairman. It's disappointing that we need this hearing. Mr. Allen, I want to apologize for what's happened to you. Our country should treat you better.
Thank you for the apology.
Thank you for your long career of service to our country. And I just wanted to ask, your experience spans a couple decades. And so over your time in service to our country, just confined to the FBI, what kind of changes? I think the perception back home is the rank and file people at the FBI are people that we want to be there, that we want to support. And frankly, there's not a lot of trust in the current leadership system. And when you ask questions, a lot of my constituents had the exact same questions, and others did. So thank you for taking the courage to just ask an honest question. And the way that that was treated is shameful. And we're here today in part because of that. And frankly, Mr. Horowitz is continuing a 3-4 year long, hopefully imminent report that answers the exact same question. So how have you seen the FBI change as someone who moved up through the ranks?
I would say that, unfortunately, in my experience, with the culture at the FBI, it's very easy for leaders there to kind of impose their wills on their subordinates. It's a culture where there are a lot of careerists and blue flamers who'll do what they need to climb up the charts and the ladders. And if that includes burning other agents or subordinate employees to get to where they want to get in the organization, whether that's for power or money concerns, that's something I've observed in the culture of the FBI since I started there in 2008 as a contractor, worked for a couple of years, and I got on officially with the Charlotte field office in late 2015. So I'd like to say that this is from my personal experience, a sea change, but from what I've seen, there have always been vain careerists within the organization who will destroy people in order to climb the charts.
So safe to say we're not always promoting the best and brightest.
I would concur with that statement.
How do we need to change the culture to get it back on track?
I think there needs to be more accountability, and there needs to be a high focus on moral and ethical behavior within the organization. And I think outside checks and balances via policy change where the Bureau isn't allowed to simply just review their own conduct, to truly have an external watchdog force that can actually cause punitive change and enact measures in the organization. I think that's a big part of it. That's what I would advocate for. But I know a lot of the folks that join the FBI, they get into it, and it's not quite what they expected once they get on the inside. So there's a lot of cultural change just from the historical culture of the place that has to change. And I'd like to tell you that I'm shocked that this is where the FBI has come today. But frankly, I'm not shocked at all that this kind of lawless conduct could have occurred within the walls of the organization.
Yeah, sad, but I've heard it from many other people, and frankly, you felt the blunt end of it. And again, hopefully we can make this right swiftly, and you serve out a good career there. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
You know, Mr. Horowitz, in another way, you've done things that my constituents appreciate. You've provided oversight and accountability, and the oversight and accountability function of Congress seems to work. The public finds out about all kinds of things, but they're just so frustrated because at the end of the day, Congress just shuts up and cuts the check. We don't provide reform. We don't provide accountability. Instead, you see people like Mr. Veltri promoted, somewhat validating Mr. Allen's observations, and trusted, as it turns out, with critical investigations. I mean, we saw the FBI. I hope there's an investigation underway on the events in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th. Is there an active Inspector General overview of that?
I actually don't have jurisdiction over that. My understanding is the DHS Inspector General.
Inspector General Kufari does. And as SIGI, you know, the Integrity Committee, you formally directed that. You know, they've tried to target people, even as Inspector Generals. Did you feel sometimes limited or coerced because of how SIGI has changed their behavior over the years?
Yeah, let me just say, I was the chair of SIGI, not the chair of the Integrity Committee, and by law, that
is separate
distinction. Congress has separated those two, but the Integrity is part of SIGI. Look, I've dealt with issues at the Integrity Committee. I think there are improvements that certainly need and can be made, both internally and through legislative action, that would improve the process. But I do think, and I've worked with folks there, that they have tried to exercise their responsibilities, the chair of the as members of the Integrity Committee, as best they could.
Well, one thing we absolutely have to do is we have to change the way it's funded. Right now, they're harvesting cash from other agencies including extra money. And so Congress needs to take action, in particular with funding. My time has expired and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I'll pick up maybe a little bit where my colleague just left off. And the question was about Butler, Pennsylvania. I'm curious to know if any of you are aware as to whether or not the FBI is involved at all in determining what's going on in Springfield, Ohio, because as far as I'm concerned, there is domestic terrorism afoot, and it is at the word of the Republican nominee and his running mate. So do we know if anyone is checking into that on the federal level? I'm just curious. Just a yes or no, anybody?
I don't know.
Okay,
Congresswoman.
perfect. Either way, I want to move on, and I want to talk about Mr. Kirshner. I'm just curious, if you were to define what weaponization of the federal government looks like, just in a quick, short definition, what would it be?
Using the Department of Justice to reward your friends and your criminal associates by delivering pardons after they'd been convicted by juries or before their case was even concluded or before their case was even charged, and conversely using the Department of Justice to punish your perceived enemies, order investigations and prosecutions, even if they're not warranted by evidence. I'm sorry, that was not brief.
That's okay. It was accurate. Because that's how I see weaponization as well. And it's something that we saw a lot out of Trump specifically, because all of his friends were going to prison, and he's probably got more friends that are headed to prison soon. And if we are lucky, he will find him a cellmate soon as well. But nevertheless, as we talk about weaponization, because this whole committee feels as if it's projection, I want to go to something that's pretty interesting, but I'm gonna start with Mr. Allen. I wasn't on this committee the first time you were here, so this is the first time we're interacting, but I am caught up to speed, and I have a simple question for you, yes or no. Do you believe that career employees like yourself should have your job taken away even if you've done your job well and followed agency rules? Do you think it's right to be fired just because you have political disagreements with those above you?
No, it's not right to persecute anyone for their political or religious beliefs, especially in an organization where there's supposed to be the free flow of ideas.
Okay, I appreciate your answer and your honesty, and I absolutely agree with you. It is interesting, though, because that's exactly what Trump and my Republican colleagues would do if they won the election. It's spelled out in Project 2025. Trump would strip due process rights available to career civil servants and remove, suspend, or reduce their pay in an all-out effort to oust agency employees for partisan reasons rather than because of issues with merit or performance. And before you say Trump and Project 2025 aren't affiliated, I'd ask unanimous consent to submit into the record Trump's campaign page, where he claims on day one, I'd reissue 2020 executive order restoring the president's authority to fire rogue bureaucrats, and I will wield that power very aggressively. The only reason democracy is standing strong today is because we had public servants who pledged loyalty to the Constitution and rule of law and not to Donald Trump. Mr. Kirshner, your testimony today demonstrates you're familiar with Project 2025. Is that a fair statement?
Particularly as it pertains to the Department of Justice.
Okay. And you are aware, or maybe you're not, we'll see, on page 547, that Project 2025 states its goal of implementing a top-to-bottom overhaul of DOJ that, quote, must include the FBI, because anything less would, quote, guarantee the failure of the conservative administration's agenda.
That does not make a lot of sense to me.
Okay, but that's in Project 2025.
It is
Okay.
on, yes, it is.
All right, just wanted to clarify that. And also this agenda includes, for example, enforcing federal criminal laws against providers and distributors of abortion medication, as well as rescinding policies that hold that sex discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, transgender identity, among other things. Is that correct?
Yes, Representative, on page 562, they talk about aggressively going after prosecuting, quote, providers and distributors of abortion pills that use the mail. So folks who are, mailing abortion pills to women who need it, that is really not what is endangering our country or inspiring, violent crime.
I absolutely agree. This week, the New York Times reported multiple instances of Trump trying to weaponize the DOJ to retaliate against his political enemies, finding that, quote, Mr. Trump told Mr. McGahn that he wanted to order Mr. Sessions, the Attorney General, to prosecute Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Comey, and if Mr. Sessions refused, he would take matters into his own hands. I know my time is running out, so I just have to ask, Mr. Chairman, given you've convened this hearing, theoretically it's you, given that you've convened this hearing on weaponizing federal agencies, will you commit to publicly condemning Trump for attempting to weaponize the government and condemn Project 2025 for its efforts to do the same?
Gentlelady's time has expired. And I yield, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. And Mr. Allen, I'm going to give you a little notice. You've written some notes. As far as I'm concerned, you're the person I'm most interested in hearing from. I'm from Charlotte. I know I've been to the Charlotte field office. I know some people there. I was extraordinarily impressed by you and the other whistleblowers when you previously appeared before the subcommittee. I'm impressed by you again. I haven't been able to be here the whole time. I'm going to yield you some time, just if you have things that you wish to say in just a moment. But the first thing I'm going to say before I do that, and then I'm going to give Mr. Jordan the rest of my time, is I'm just overwhelmingly troubled by the fact that no one seems to be able to do much about what has happened to you. You got the Inspector General, very respectable person. You've done a lot of things that have been historic, but you issue a management alert. And to me, it sounds ridiculous to say you don't think these guys at the FBI, the senior managers, understand that they shouldn't retaliate against somebody by putting them under extreme personal hardship while they engage in a completely baseless persecution over their security clearance, and they leave them in limbo for 27 months, and to this moment haven't paid what I understand to be the consideration under the settlement that's been reached. That is astonishing. And if that's not astonishing enough, that all you can do is issue an alert. Congress does absolutely nothing. In the majority party, not one thing to impose on the Department of Justice or the FBI an appropriate sanction for what they've done. And we have a hearing about it, and everybody in the minority party, they're fearing what Donald Trump would do in the next administration while they sit here and they look at the guy who's been persecuted by the FBI. And everybody in the room understands it. Mr. Allen, do you have comments you wish to make? I'll give you about a minute and a half, and then I want to turn the rest of my time to Mr. Jordan.
Yes, sir. I would just say that I consider the hearing today my last act of service as a public servant for the United States of America. And I'll give you my professional opinion. I was an intel professional for our country for many years, and I would give recommendations, and I'd also look at indications and warnings. So I would offer this to the American people as my warning to them. Since this is a warning to the American people, I say, I personally have no confidence that the FBI will rein in its own conduct. I've been persecuted along with Garrett, Steve and Kyle, and countless other whistleblowers. It is my opinion that the Bureau used reprisal and fear to control the workforce. It has been a seemingly effective tactic. I personally believe that there are no current effective checks and balances against them conducting lawless action with any type of correction in a legitimate time frame. I welcome the work of the IG, but I think any type of lawless action, there's no legitimate time frame to rein them back in. Their ability to overclassify information can allow them to stonewall forever. To the American people, you have a duty as a citizen to vote, and I strongly urge you to do so. It's how you participate in the American experience. I know people have doubts about election integrity, but you must vote. It is your claim. Stake your claim and don't forfeit it willingly. Have your voice heard. My other recommendations are in the natural order. First, vote. The second is the Second Amendment. Arm yourself and know how to defend yourself. Make 3 to 4 friends in your neighborhood and promise to come to each other's mutual aid in times of hardship. And during the Great Depression, people stocked up a pantry. So I think that's a good practice, especially in our economic times, and make sure you have 3 to 4 months of food. As a person of faith, I'd say pray the rosary, go to the First Friday devotions. That's for everybody, all my brothers and sisters of all faiths, and I know I'm Catholic. and read the gospel of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and live it every day. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for the time.
You know, Mr. Allen, the fact that there are servants like you who have borne up under persecution that a lot of political leaders in this country do not care about is the thing that heartens the American people. And I'm confident the American people will resolve the situation, no matter how weak Washington is in response. Mr. Jordan, I'm sorry I didn't reserve much time for you, but I yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, for those well-said words. Mr. Horowitz, did you ever request permission from the Deputy Attorney General to investigate attorney misconduct in Special Counsel David Weiss's office?
I have not at this point asked for that authority. As we've engaged on this issue in the past, it's first of all not clear whether we have that authority. I'd have to have that discussion. But secondly, while the prosecution was ongoing, it was my view, consistent with our policy and practice, to let that prosecution play out. And then,
do you have concerns?
I think there have been a number of legitimate concerns raised. Yes, Congressman.
Time has expired.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Donald Trump's Project 2025 is direct attack on women's reproductive freedom and healthcare. And one of its most effective assaults on our rights comes from its call to criminally punish healthcare providers who distribute FDA-approved abortion medication by mail. This would effectively end access to a safe legal procedure that 2/3 of American women who seek an abortion rely on. And how would Trump's Project 2025 do that, Mr. Chairman? By weaponizing our federal government against women and doctors. The most corrosive attack would direct the Justice Department to ban the mailing of abortion pills by enforcing an obscure 1873 obscenity law called the Comstock Act. You heard that right, a 151-year-old obscenity law. Mr. Kirshner, could reviving this 19th century statute and weaponizing DOJ to enforce it block a clinician from sending abortion pills to patients?
It could.
And yes or no, could it stop the manufacturers from even delivering mifepristone pills to clinicians and pharmacies?
It seems it could.
Trump's Project 2025 directs the Justice Department to start using its surveillance powers to monitor these pill makers and goes so far as to name them in their blueprint. Mr. Kirshner, could that kind of shadowing result in medicine companies being targeted and harassed?
Yes.
Could weaponizing the Justice Department to enforce this Civil War-era law in fact create a de facto nationwide ban on mifepristone?
It could.
This isn't about politics. This is about control. It's about denying women the ability to make decisions about our own bodies. It's about putting Donald Trump and J.D. Vance right in the exam rooms of doctors and millions of women. It's about punishing and even jailing doctors who provide compassionate care or loved ones who help you obtain the health care that you seek. Mr. Kirshner, I want to ask you about another way Trump's Project 2025 would weaponize our government against millions of women and doctors. The medicine we're talking about, mifepristone, has been deemed safe and effective by the FDA for over 25 years. Women in nearly 100 countries have safely used it for decades. Yet, Mr. Kirshner, Trump's Project 2025 would require the FDA to, quote, revisit and withdraw its initial approval of mifepristone, falsely claiming without evidence these drugs are dangerous and should be illegal. Would that Project 2025 agenda be based on sound medicine, science, and facts, or would it be a blatant weaponization of the FDA?
The latter, and it sounds like it's based on politics, not on science, not on medicine, and not on what is best for women and the decisions they have to make with their doctors.
Thank you. The FDA recently allowed certified brick and mortar pharmacies to dispense mifepristone and doctors to prescribe mifepristone via telehealth, which expands abortion pill access, avoids added costs or stigma. But Trump's Project 2025 calls for the FDA to reverse that guidance, despite the Supreme Court recently rejecting that argument. It goes even further by eroding the privacy protections of abortion patients by promoting prosecution for women who take the pills. Could this weaponization of our government agencies obliterate the privacy of those who obtain or dispense abortion pills?
It could, and it's dangerous.
Project 2025's assault on our basic freedoms doesn't just stop at women's health. It undermines the safety of whole regions of our nation. Before my time expires, I'll quickly note that Trump's dangerous Project 2025 proposes to eliminate the National Weather Service in its entirety. I'll remind everyone that we have Hurricane Helene, who is quickly approaching the shores of my state. This is the very agency responsible for helping us prepare for and respond to climate change-driven natural disasters. Right now, Hurricane Helene bears down on Florida, and it's the National Weather Service that provides critical forecasts that help warn and keep our communities safe. Let's be absolutely clear. Project 2025 is not about reform, it's about control. Whether it's women bodies or the agencies that protect us from disaster, Trump's Project 2025 would erode the freedoms that we all take for granted. We cannot allow Trump's dangerous agenda to strip away our rights and leave millions more vulnerable than ever. Whether it's criminalizing healthcare providers or dismantling the National Weather Service as more hurricanes threaten our coasts, Project 2025 is an existential threat to our nation's core values and safety. We will not let this agenda undo everything we've fought for, because we will not go back. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair asks unanimous consent to enter into the record a coalition's letter on reforms that are needed. The letter is addressed to Chairman Comer, Chairman Turner, and myself, Ranking Member Nadler, Raskin, and Himes. Without objection, that will be entered. Chair now will recognize. Yeah, you recognize the ranking member for as much time as she'd like. I'll give you 6, 7 minutes, 8 minutes if you'd like, and then or a closing statement after that. And then I have a couple more questions, and then we'll be adjourned. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. I don't know what to do with all that time. Kind of freaked me out when you said that. I started,
You could always yield it back to me.
oh, no, I don't think I'm not giving up what's given to me. I'll tell you that much. And you never know when you can get that, but I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here, each one of you. Thank you for expressing your ideas and your thoughts. I did want to ask some follow-up questions, though, to some of those. Mr. Inspector General Horowitz, my colleagues across the aisle have said that the Inspector General found that the FBI intentionally weaponizing the security clearance process to purge conservatives from its ranks. Mr. Inspector General, did your office find that the FBI has a pattern or practice of misusing the security clearance adjudication process to purge certain FBI employees?
We have not made such a finding.
Okay. And also, there were allegations made that the FBI has weaponized this, any findings that it was related specifically to individuals who might have expressed sentiments with regard to January 6th. Did you find that?
We haven't made such a finding. We've actually, Congresswoman, had complaints come in from both sides on these issues. On one side, complaints about field offices not taking action in January 6 cases, and on the other side, complaints about offices that did take matters in January 6.
So as usual, it's across the board of the political
We have
spectrum.
complaints from whistleblowers on both sides on that.
And that is par for the course you have found in the FBI and in your position over hearing from your other Inspector General officers that complaints may come from both sides of the political spectrum.
I've certainly seen, with regard to the DOJ law enforcement components, issues coming from various perspectives. I will say non-ideological, ideological complaints across.
What about religious? Have you made any findings that the FBI security clearance process targets Christians?
We've not made such a finding.
Or targeting military veterans?
We've not made such a finding.
Thank you. You know, I understand my colleagues' concern that it would appear that Democrats are not taking the issue of whistleblowers seriously. And I think we do. We have a committee for that, the Oversight Committee, for which when I was a member of the Oversight, that's when I first met Mr. Horowitz, was in having oversight over different agencies and questioning you about some of your findings there, some of which, when I first came to Congress, were targeted against a Democratic administration, at the time, the Obama administration. We've gone through a Trump administration. We're now in a Biden administration. And so the vagaries of political persuasion, you've seen them all. But I think the reason that the Democratic members have been bringing up Project 2025 and President Trump is because it presents a global threat, a true weaponization of offices and of a position against the American people as a whole. We see places like North Korea, Hungary, Iran, now Venezuela, where those citizens could not have imagined 20, 30 years before, potentially, that they are living under a dictatorial rule. I went to school with individuals, I'm dating myself, in the early 80s with students who had fled Iran. I have been around young people in undergrad who have fled North Korea. And the notion that anything like that could happen in this country seems so antithetical to our thinking. But we cannot drop the ball in when we see an individual or a group of individuals who have power trying to take that control. And it is our opinion, many of our opinion, that Trump, for his own purposes, has now joined forces with individuals who have offered Project 2025 as a means to an end for each one of their own desires. I would ask to submit to the record a CNN article, Trump claims not to know who is behind Project 2025. CNN review found at least 140 people who work for him are involved.
Objection.
Thank you. And in this article and in other places, we will see the nexus of relationships between the president and individuals who have written this. 6 of his former cabinet secretaries, 4 individuals nominated by the former president as ambassadors, his first deputy chief of staff, my former colleague Mark Meadows, and also his longtime advisor, Stephen Miller, who were advising Project 2025. Federal Communications Commissioner under President Trump, Brendan Carr, Lisa Laurenti, who was a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, all wrote components of Project 2025. We have the American Accountability Foundation putting together a roster of current federal workers it suspects could impede Trump's plan for a second term. I would direct your attention to what we have up there on the screen, which shows so many associates who have in fact contributed to the transitional plan for a presidential Trump next term that are part of his orbit. Paul Dance, top official in Trump's White House. We have Ben Carson, former HUD secretary. Christopher Miller, acting Secretary of Defense. Peter Navarro wrote a section defending the former president's trade policies. This has been drafted as the next conservative president's last opportunity. The last opportunity for what? Not the America we know now, a different form of America, one that meets the demands of specific individuals, not all of us. One women that does not include us having complete autonomy of ourselves. One that puts a form of Christianity that may not be my form of Christianity. That's why we have a separation of church and state, so that we can all worship our God as we wish. That's not what Project 2025 is looking towards. Today, you may be part of it. Tomorrow, you may not be. Today, it may help you. Tomorrow, it may not. I know I'm on the front line. I know my community's on the front line. But tomorrow, it may be yours. Next week, next month, 180 days he's given himself. 2 years from now, it may be your son, your daughter, pointing in the military, pointing a weapon at their fellow citizen, at their brother or their sister who are protesting on the streets of America. Because yes, in Project 2025, it allows the president to direct the active military to come to the streets of the United States against those that he deemed as political rivals. That's in Project 2025. Those are the things that are in there against us as Americans. And that's the reason why, Mr. Chairman, we keep talking about it. Not because whistleblowers' issues are not unimportant, but because this is a clear and present threat right now to the American people that we need to join forces with and stop. So I want to thank you for the additional time. And while we're on the recess, God bless you and your family. And I pray safety for all of us as members, all people who have spoken out, and individuals we may not agree with one another. But I pray that this election goes safely and that we are all back here again to continue the people's business.
I agree. Just a few more questions, if I could. Mr. Horowitz, you said you've not seen a pattern, but you have found evidence, or let's say, let me do it as a question. Have you found any evidence of a focus on religion and vaccination status playing a role in discussions about clearance decisions?
We certainly did, as to Mr. Allen.
Of course. I mean, that's the whole point. I thought, you know, his email questioning the leadership at the FBI, they used that. They used his vaccination status. They used his religion. I thought pretty soon they were going to accuse Marcus Allen of writing Project 2025. I thought that might happen. You didn't write Project 2025, did you, Mr. Allen? No, you had nothing to do with that. Mr. Levitt, you didn't either. Right, and I know Mr. Horowitz didn't have anything to do with that. Let's go to this questionnaire, because this questionnaire that was used by the FBI in these clearance discussions, I find very troubling. In the opening, in the sort of the preamble before they get to the questions, they say they're asking colleagues to rat on fellow colleagues. They say, you are being asked to provide information as a fact witness. Should you refuse to answer or fail to reply, action against your security clearance may be undertaken. So I find this amazing. Like, they're going to a colleague in a security clearance investigation. They're asking a colleague to talk about that individual. And if they don't, they're going to lose their security clearance. I mean, that, and then when you look at the question, do you find that a little troubling, Mr. Horowitz?
I certainly find I'm not sure I find necessarily the questioning of individuals about allegations troubling. How you tell them about it and talk to them about it is concerning, as you indicated, and certainly the questions were highly appropriate.
Certainly coupled together. Hey, we're doing a security investigation on Mr. Allen, as an example, and if you don't answer it, your security clearance is in jeopardy. And oh, by the way, here's the question. Did Mr. Allen ever voice support for President Trump? Did Mr. Allen ever express concerns about the COVID-19 vaccination? Did Mr. Allen ever attend a gun rally? That is as troubling as it gets. And right at the top of this questionnaire, FBI Security Division, Security Integrity and Investigation Section, Clearance Investigation Unit. Mr. Levitt, have you ever seen anything like this?
Not before this last round of whistleblowers, but I do think the point I tried to make earlier is even if this questionnaire was only typed up by a couple of individuals, and to be clear, those are the same ones that were worried about the Kelly cart. So they're the same ones that were worried that they're right. Supervisors. But even where in cases where this questionnaire wasn't used, we've heard from a number of whistleblowers that these types of things were asked about. And of course, we know they factored into the decisions. And so I think it's not just about the questionnaire, right? I hope that the Inspector General's office will look at how all of these issues were focused on by leadership.
That's the element of fear Mr. Allen just talked about in his last response to Mr. Bishop. The fear, that environment of fear. And this is it in practice right here. That is what is scary. So if that's not weaponization of government, earlier Ms. Crockett asked about, would the weaponization of government include certain things? It would certainly include this in the environment described by Mr. Allen, and it would certainly include the 27 months that he had to live through and the 24 months now Garrett O'Boyle has had to live through. Again, I want to thank you all for being here. Oh, Mr. Kirshner, would the weaponization of government include lying to the FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign? You got asked a series of questions. Would it include? I'm just curious if you thought that would be the weaponization of government.
Lying to a court, any court, FISA court or otherwise, is
That was-
deeply troubling.
That wasn't the question. Would the weaponization of government include lying to a FISA court to spy on a presidential campaign?
I would suppose it could.
Could?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Good. Okay. Would it include text messages written by people who were involved in that effort to spy on presidential campaign? Text messages like, "Don't worry, we'll stop Trump." Would that be the weaponization of government as well?
I think that's inappropriate language because we're supposed to be doing our work, apolitically, without fear or favor. So, I think that's ill-advised.
Sure was. It's so ill-advised. Mr. Mueller kicked those individuals off his team. So ill-advised that Kevin Kleinsmith got prosecuted for lying to the FISA court in order to go spy on a presidential campaign. That seems to me to be the weaponization of government as well. I'm going to thank all of you for being here. Mr. Allen, we really thank you. You're the one who's had to endure this. And your testimony to the strength of your faith and your family, I think, is just inspiring. We appreciate your service to our country, service to this committee and to the country for telling your story and being willing to come forward and work with Mr. Levitt. Mr. Horowitz, we appreciate the work you've done over the years in getting this information to us. And with that, the committee stands adjourned. Okay, Caroline.
Well, that was interesting. Who is lying? Republicans or Democrats? Trump says he's not part of it. They're dragging it in it. Who's lying? It's unknown who's lying. It's going to be an election of the decade, I have a feeling. It is going to be an interesting election, I have a feeling. I just have an interesting feeling. I just thought it was interesting. I was listening to it. I just thought I would bring it up to you guys. Hi, Indiana. How are you? I thought it was an interesting hearing. I was listening to it. Yes, lots of lies on both sides, but it was an interesting how a lot of the FBI addresses were given out. And the whistleblower addresses were given out and they were injured and killed. Who leaked all those addresses? Isn't that interesting? Addresses were leaked. Isn't that interesting how they all of a sudden were leaked? That came out in the hearing. There's FBI agents that were suspended for no reason, and now they're waiting 2+ years. They were suspended for 2 years, but rehired. And now they're waiting 2+ years for back pay. But they're leading the investigation. This is what really got me, is they're leading the investigation. They're the leading agent in the investigation in what happened in Florida with the attempted assassination. They're the leading FBI agent, but yet they were suspended and they're still waiting for pay. That's interesting. That is interesting. Wow. That was an interesting hearing. Yeah, that is crazy, isn't it? Yeah, they were suspended for 2 years without pay. But then they were reinstated, and their pay is supposed to be reinstated, and they're leading the investigation into the assassination attempt of President Trump. How many others are like that? It's crazy, crazy. And the director of that Project 2025 came out publicly and said Trump had nothing to do with it, but yet they're spending all this money on this. Trump has said he has nothing to do with it, but we're spending all this money of ours on these hearings. I don't know if he has anything to do with it. But let's have some hearings on what Harris has said. Yeah, we want to go at Trump. Let's have some hearings on Harris. Harris says she's not going to take the guns because she's a gun owner. But yet she has threatened to take our guns more than once, publicly more than once. She has stated when she was the DA, I enjoyed signing my name on warrants and letting them sitting in jail for 48 hours, and then letting them out and dropping charges. And ruining their lives. She stated that publicly. Am I for Harris? No. Am I for Trump? No. So let's get that straight. So both of them, yes, both of them lie. They both lie. Oh, she did. I didn't look at here. Look at it. I didn't see the interview. I've just seen bits and clips of it. I don't think we have a candidate for 2024. We don't have a candidate because the last debate, they sounded like a bunch of teenagers having temper tantrums. Let's get real. Let's talk about real life. We've got something going on here. And we need to really talk about real life. Real life, what's really happening in our government. I watched a show yesterday, which we're still part of the network. We watched a show yesterday. I watched the show yesterday, and there's something we really need to think about and what the government is talking about. And I'm gonna look, what the government is talking about. And, we need to really start thinking about what is actually happening. Because what they're talking about and what is happening and we need to really think about what is going on. And it is really coming to a head because I don't know if anybody has really been thinking about what is going on in our government. And what they're talking about in our government. And a few things that they're talking about Um, and okay, this is the one. The one thing they are talking about in our government is not good. And yeah, it is very scary what they're talking about. Um, yeah, it's getting scarier by the minute. It's getting scarier by the minute. By the minute. I like Redacted. They're open, they're honest, and what they talk about is real life. And some of the things that they're talking about in this show is scary. It's really, really scary. So let's play a little bit of it.
The United States, the Pentagon just announced it is sending additional U.S. troops right now to the Middle East because of the intense bombing that Israel has unleashed on Lebanon, the escalation there. So the Pentagon doubling down. Yes, we are sending additional troops right now as we speak. And it's funny because didn't Kamala Harris during the debate just about a week or so ago say that there are no American forces in any active combat zone anywhere in the world? Of course, that got quickly debunked. But here you go. The Biden administration actively sending more Americans into the hornet's nest as we speak. So we're going to look at this escalation and where things stand in Lebanon at this hour.
Plus, Ukrainian President Zelensky is super jealous. He wants troops. He wants an escalation of his war. He's in the United States this week to pitch that. He's touring weapons factory. He says he has a victory plan. We're going to look at how this troll continues to open his hand for more U.S. dollars while his own people die because he's horrid.
By the way, we flew him in on U.S. military aircraft. He's a dictator. He's not. He canceled elections, and we are flying him on U.S. military aircraft around the United States right now. Like, this is the love that we give to these dictators right now. Democracy in Ukraine. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Also, this bounty. So now the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, has released the letter that Ryan Routh apparently wrote calling for the assassination of President Trump, and he couldn't complete the job. So anyone else out there, $150,000 he will pay you in order to complete the job. Why is the Department of Justice publishing this letter when, of course, they've been so opposed to publishing the Tennessee trans shooter manifesto or documents related to the Mar-a-Lago raid are all completely redacted? But this one you can fully read. So we're going to talk about all of that on the show. Plus, we're going to talk about Germany's elections, of course, coming up as well. But good to see all of you guys on this Monday. So glad to have you here. Good to see everyone in the chat room. We are live on Rumble. Hulik, nice to see you in Rumble. Petite Phantom on Rumble. Good to see you guys. Yeah, we're live streaming on Rumble in the chat and on YouTube as well.
And hey, for those of you who were here early, thank you for noticing. We put an intro back on. People seem to like it. It's a greatest hits for dictators. If you come here early, you get to see all the war lies laid out in front of you. You know, it's meant to sort of be prologue that teaches us not to swallow bullshit when they sell us war. But our whole show today is about them selling us bullshit to sell us war. So we're just going to keep trying to learn. That's what we're doing here. That's why we get up in the morning. We got stuff to do. So we're going to get to that.
You know, I just want to say on the intro. So yeah, we used to have this intro for like a couple of years here on the show. We had a 30-minute countdown timer and people loved it. And we would rotate through our different countdown timers. And then when we got rid of it, we were testing it out for a couple of months over the summer to see if people liked it or didn't like it. And people were like, bring it back, please. So many people were like, please bring back the intro. So it's back. It's now a 15-minute intro, and some people are wondering, remember, we're always live at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So you don't have to watch the intro. Like, you can hang out with everyone and all of that, but it's not like a mandatory thing. And it also takes about 15 minutes for YouTube to send out their alerts that we're live. So that 15-minute buffer is a great time for everyone to kind of gather up and watch some nutcases talking in front of Congress and other stuff. Some great clips that our team has put together here. So glad to have the intro back. But I just want to make that little public service announcement. Our show starts officially at 4 p.m. Eastern time every day, Monday through Thursday.
All right, so we're going to talk about Israel ready to up the escalation of the war in just a second. But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at Ramp, because if you are looking to simplify your business finances and get a better handle on where your money is going, who's spending what.
Do it through escalating. They support the plan of de-escalation through escalation. What in the hell is going on right now in the Middle East? We are on the brink of a massive war. Dan Cohen from Uncaptured Media just returned from Israel and joins us now. Dan, great to see you. Welcome to the show. Hopefully you can help make sense of what's actually happening there right now. What are you hearing the latest from your sources on the ground there?
Well, it's the biggest escalation since this war, this regional war, began on October 7th of 2023. The largest escalation on Israel's northern front with Lebanon. So far today, I mean, the latest numbers are 274 deaths, more than in Lebanon, more than 1,000 wounded. That includes those deaths include 21 children, 39 women, 2 medics. They're images of ambulance targeted by the Israeli military. So it's very reminiscent of the early days of the war on Gaza following the October 7th attack. And I think we're going to see over at least the next days and possibly weeks this escalation continue. And many, many more deaths of indiscriminate targeting by Israel. So when they say Hezbollah targets, you know, it's the same sort of claims they made about Gaza, where they would just bomb any kind of target, you know, whether that's a civilian house. And they've put out a cartoon, actually, another animation saying that houses in southern Lebanon have Hezbollah missiles inside them. If we think about the cartoon they put out in, I think, November of 2023, saying that there was a Hamas command center under Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. And then when they actually got down there, their whole proof of some kind of command center was they showed a calendar on the wall and said this is where they kept the hostages, but it was actually just a calendar. So the whole thing was a farce, and this is clearly a farce of what they're claiming to target. What they're actually implementing is something called the Dahia Doctrine. This is an Israeli military strategy that was formalized in 2006 by then Israeli military chief of staff Gadi Eisenkot, who today is, you know, would be considered some kind of leftist in Israel and is a politician. But basically the Dahia Doctrine, named for the southern Beirut neighborhood of Dahia, which is kind of a base of support for Hezbollah, is the logic is that you destroy the civilian infrastructure and population and target civilians in an effort to turn the civilian population against the resistance group. So the idea is you just kill as many Lebanese indiscriminately as possible, make their lives miserable, and then they'll turn against the resistance. Now, this is what I would say is typical colonial thinking. It's completely backwards, because as what happens is the more you destroy a country, and this is, you know, we can see this throughout history, whether in Afghanistan or Vietnam or, you know, many countries that have gone through foreign occupations and
The
struggled
bombing
to
of Britain
liberate themselves.
by the Nazis.
Right. People basically, they end up supporting the resistance. The support for the resistance hardens. And so I think that's, you know, what we're going to see is as this Dahia Doctrine is implemented on a greater scale than it was even before in 2006 when Israel used it, then, you know, it's going to be more destruction and more resistance. And Hezbollah is a much more capable military force than anything Israel has dealt with to this point, certainly more than Hamas, which is very plucky and has been, you know, in its incredible network of tunnels under Gaza. But, you know, it's Hamas, Gaza is under siege. So the fact that they were able to build that tunnel network, develop the weapons, some smuggled, but mostly through their own ingenuity and local production inside Gaza, well, Lebanon does not have that problem, does not have that issue of not having, not being under siege by Israel. So Lebanon Hezbollah has much more advanced missiles and weaponry. It has much more experience also because it is relatively recently, came out of the war in Syria, which since 2011 was fighting ISIS and Al Qaeda Takfiris and CIA warlords under the banner of the Free Syrian Army that were dedicated to overthrowing the Syrian government and raising the black flag of ISIS over Damascus and eventually to Tehran and Beirut too. So Hezbollah intervened along with the Syrian army and eventually Russia inside Syria to fight these terrorists back. And it gained a ton of invaluable fighting experience there. So Israel, I don't think, is prepared in any way for the kind of resistance it's going to see. First from Hezbollah's arsenal, it's now, we've seen the first strikes of its more medium range missiles that have hit settlements deep inside the West Bank, like Ariel and Karnei Shomron. There's reports those have been hit, and then let alone the possibility of an Israeli ground invasion into Lebanon, which is just going to go miserably for Israel, and of course will cost the Lebanese civilian population dearly, will cost them massive amounts of life. But Netanyahu's stated goal of we're going to return normalcy and security to the north of Israel. So the residents who have been displaced from the north since October 7th and are extremely frustrated and angry at the government for failing to bring some kind of security, well, that is now going to be put off even more. And those neighborhoods, which have been and cities which have been abandoned, very well may turn into smoldering piles of rubble. So, just as Netanyahu lied on after October 7th and said, we're going to try to bring the hostages back from Gaza, it was never about that. And he's now lying and saying we're trying to bring security to the north. It's not about that either. It's just going up the escalation ladder because Israel doesn't have any alternative domestically because of its politics. So I think what we're going to see is large swaths of Lebanon will be, especially southern Lebanon, will be decimated by Israel. We'll see huge amounts of civilian casualties, as we're already seeing today, reminiscent of the early months of the Gaza war. But what Israel's not prepared for is the damage that Hezbollah will be able to inflict on Israeli territory. And the Israeli national psyche is, I think, unable to cope with that. We've seen for a variety of reasons. One, it's extremely traumatized. Israel is not used to extended, protracted wars. It's used to, short, fast operations of ferocious bombing backed by the U.S. as a superpower, and then it, arbitrarily declares a ceasefire and says we won, even though there was, they didn't actually achieve anything other than massive amounts of destruction, but no strategic goals have been accomplished. And so that's what it's accustomed to. It's not accustomed to seeing its own cities take such heavy damage. So more and more Israelis are leaving the country. I was just looking at some statistics that are kind of dense, but I'm just looking at some of the data that has recently been published by the Israeli government on emigration from Israel. And keep in mind, there was already a massive amount of emigration in 2023 before October 7th as a result of Israel's judicial reform, judicial coup, whatever you want to call it. But basically the movement by the government to get rid of the Supreme Court, which liberal Israeli society was very opposed to. At that point, about 30% of Israelis were considering leaving the country altogether. And then October 7th happened. Now, since October 7th, This is the data from the first 7 months of 2024. Is there an increase of 58.9% of immigrants from the previous year, which was already much higher. So we're already seeing in the early months of this year, the first up until July, a huge increase, an unprecedented increase of Israelis leaving the country, saying, I don't want anything to do with this anymore. This is just, it's not worth the price to live here. And then now we have this escalation in Lebanon. One more thing, I had a friend, I spoke to an Israeli friend who lives somewhat near Gaza today, who I've worked with in the past. And he, on October 7th, I called him and asked if he was all right. And he said he was hiding in his house. Since then, he's been okay. Now he tells me my cousins who live in the north, I'm telling them to come to my house because it's not safe. It's not safe up there. So, the south is not really safe either. It's not as if Hamas has been defeated. All those military battalions are still in existence and still carrying out operations against the Israeli military. So that objective of defeating Hamas has not happened, is not anywhere near happening, despite the claims of Israeli military and government officials. And now they're opening a new front that they can't not handle in the north. So, Israel, I think, is just opening another can of worms, another escalation that its population cannot handle. So, and again, this is thanks to the unbridled support of the Biden or Kamala Harris or whoever's running the ghost ship of the Biden administration, with their support, their open support of Israel's so-called de-escalation through escalation strategy. So this is basically leading to an expanded disaster on top of what already is a disaster.
And if you watch all the Sunday shows, the Biden administration is working tirelessly to bring about a ceasefire right now. They're working tirelessly to bring about a ceasefire. Yeah. What are you smoking? That's a big line of garbage and a total line of bullshit. Dan Cohen, who just returned from Israel, unbelievable analysis and an understanding of that region. I guess we'll be watching what the United States response will be as this descends into full-blown war in Lebanon. And a lot of people are going to die. I think you're absolutely right about that. Huge swaths of Lebanon are going to be destroyed, but also huge swaths of Israel are going to be destroyed. As our friend Douglas McGregor likes to say, make peace now, you fools. Dan, great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Clayton.
Thanks, Dan. And
it's just horrible and bloody.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to die. So southern Lebanon is going to be destroyed. Northern Israel is going to be destroyed.
Civilians who have
are going to be
nothing
destroyed.
to do with this.
Yeah. And Americans are heading there right now. So the Pentagon just announced a few minutes ago that they are sending American troops to this region. Again, why? Why is the United States getting involved in this? Because Israel wants it. They absolutely have been trying to pull the United States into a regional war. The Biden administration, of course, is falling for it. And, this is exactly what the Pentagon is doing right now. So why is the United States going there? I come back, wherever you stand on this issue, I don't really care. People get so passionate about this issue one way or the other, but should America involve itself in the Middle East? Should Americans die in the Middle East? I just can't wrap my head around it.
And recall that Americans' involvement in the Middle East is what brought 9/11 upon us, to our shores, what brought the Orlando nightclub shooting to our shores. You want more of that? Is that your answer? I guess I just led I'll tell you what the right answer is. The right answer is no. There's no other answer. I don't want your opinion if you say, yes, we should stay involved there. So Clayton just invited you to give that opinion, and I am uninviting you to give that opinion.
Well, I love that we stand for going after terrorists. We're going to go into Syria. We're going to destabilize that country and go after, terrorists. We're going to go after Hezbollah. We're going to go after Hamas. But we'll have our border wide open, our southern border wide open. So the Biden administration is talking out of both sides of its mouth. You're literally welcoming in tens of thousands of illegal immigrants into the United States, many of them on the terrorist watch list. Mm-hmm. What the hell are you doing? You make absolutely no sense, and you're hypocrites. You're absolutely hypocrites. So anyway, that's the Biden administration for you.
All right, we're going to talk about how the Biden administration has welcomed Zelensky on our dime and on our dollar and on our shores to sell yet another war. Who was it that said one war at a time? Was it Kennedy? One word a time. I think it was Kennedy. Yeah,
sure.
we're not doing that. We're not doing that anymore. But first, before we talk about the war in Ukraine, Clayton wants to tell you about our friends over at Bunker.
I do. Cybercrime has become the third.
But
Lincoln-
I referred to my book. I've been reading, what's his name, Shore?
Michael Scheuer.
Michael Scheuer, his
Scheuer,
book.
yeah.
And it's Incredible Hubris or something. Fantastic book about all the ways we do not check ourselves before we go into war.
Michael Scheuer has been a guest on the show. He's an ex-CIA agent. He got out in 2004, and he, like the agent, you know, he's very much like anti-war. Get us out of these conflicts. Stop trying to provoke wars. He's very outspoken against the CIA. You know, I'd be curious. You know, a lot of people say, "Oh, when you're in the CIA, you're always in the CIA." Is it? He literally speaks out and writes books about how the CIA meddles in all of these countries and is destroying these countries. So they probably don't like him over there very much. But
the book is Imperial Hubris. David got it for me as my birthday present, and it's fantastic. Can't put it down. Okay, so this is the war. This is the lesson we are not learning from Lincoln, is one war at a time. Europe is going on high alert as Russia is now warning tactical nuclear weapons will be used against NATO targets if NATO and the United States do not step off, which they are not showing that they are inclined to do. Now, Hillary Clinton wants criminal charges against anyone who speaks out against NATO. So what I'm about to say, she wants to be criminal, but I'm going to say it anyway and bring it on, you warmongering piece of garbage. We'll get to Hillary in a second. Today, Zelensky is coming to the United States to meet with Biden and Harris and Trump, begging them to let him use long-range weapons to attack Russia. Here he is over the weekend in Scranton, Pennsylvania, visiting a plant that manufactures 155 millimeter artillery shells.
signing it with a freaking Sharpie.
Yes. Now, on X, he says that this very plant will be ramping up production for Ukraine. The comments alone make me want to punch a wall. For instance, this fella says, this is something I wish so many on the right would understand. The majority of the money we give to Ukraine is being used to expand capacity and production at these plants, which creates American jobs. Now, first of all, I ask you, do we want a strong economy that's based on killing people? Is that what we're agreeing to here? Second, the money we give has to be created out of debt. That so far has tanked our economy. That means that your groceries are higher. So this it pays America and makes American jobs is fairly short-sighted, given that it's tanking our economy. Don't you think? Anybody?
Yeah. Yes.
Bueller?
They don't
Now,
see it for what it is.
Professor. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro signed some bombs himself. Watch him do this while Zelensky looks on like he just sold a gym membership.
He's so proud.
Yeah. Now, this
Yeah.
is a good reminder that Democrats are the party of war. Republicans are too. We should not let them off the hook. We don't see a lot of Republicans telling the truth about this, but Democrats are leading this charge. Now, we'll see more of this week because Zelensky
This makes
is
me
in the
sick.
U.S. to present his victory plan. This is just a rebranding of his peace summit that he tried to get President Biden to attend in August, and Biden ghosted that event. So now he's coming to us. Again, it's just a rebranding of his beggar campaign to continue the death in an unwinnable war. If you watch Zelensky, he's more like a social media influencer, only instead of getting brand endorsements for skincare, he gets millions of dollars in weapons. The minute he steps off the plane, in a new place, we get fancy edited videos to boost his brand, replete with music from historical dramas such as this one, as if history is happening before our very eyes. This. Now, didn't we learn our lesson from the weapons of mass destruction propaganda? Let's all wake up, please. when we see things like this. Now, next, Zelensky goes to the UN, and again, he will meet with Vice President Harris and President Trump to make his sleazy pitch for death and pose for photos. Now, I wish both candidates would turn off the lights the way you signal that you're out of Halloween candy so that he would just go away. But Kamala Harris wants this war to continue, so she will not do so. She said so at the debates recently. Recall this.
I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to defy one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
Okay, Justin Bureau in our chat says this channel is Russian propaganda. I would like to tell Justin to kiss my ass, because what this channel does not abide is lies that lead to war. And I am going to show you, Justin, how she is lying. Before I do that, what were you going to say, David?
I was going to say, did she just admit that she shared military secrets with a non-NATO member, another military leader?
Suppose.
I think that's what she just said. I just shared intelligence with Zelensky, so how he could protect himself. And then, of course, Trump's retort a few seconds later was, so you met with him, and then 2 days later, Russia invaded. Like, whatever you did was highly effective.
Yes. Okay. Allow me to point out that this was not an invasion at the whim of Putin, and Putin has never expressed interest in going beyond the territory where the war currently is. Further, when she says he would give it up, I just wonder, when was it hers to give up? When was it ours in the United States to give up?
2014, when we incited a coup and installed a CIA-backed puppet government in Kiev. So they belong to us. They belong to BlackRock. They belong to Vanguard. So they belong to Kamala Harris by proxy.
Let's go back to the map.
We demand a return on our investment for that.
Right.
Exactly.
Yes, we are investing in this territory that we don't own. So let's again look at the map so that we look at what she's talking about. The territory that is dark red and dark gray are the regions that Ukraine has been attacking with NATO's help since 2014, as Clayton said, because either those people are Russian, ethnic Russians, or Russian aligned. Innocent people live there, and the Ukrainian army has attacked them in violent and unspeakable ways, killing civilians for a decade. In 2022, as attacks in that region escalated, Ukraine attacking, not Russia, supported by the US and NATO's money, 5 mayors from those regions asked Russia to come in and stop it. Russian parliament voted to do that, not Putin personally. And in fact, once the Russian army had control of those places, those people voted overwhelmingly to join Russia. It was not Putin's invasion. It was not an unprovoked attack. The attack had already been started by Ukraine. Now, Kamala Harris is either not studied because she's stupid or she's lying. Why would she do that? I ask you. And why would she have the hubris to talk about giving it up? Who gave us Ukraine to give up? Whose is it to give up? The people who lived there voted. Is that not the will of the people? Or should they just go back to dying because Ukraine wants to attack them? Now she says Ukraine is still sovereign today, lol. Why is Zelensky here then? He keeps pitching war as peace, and our leaders and our media are swallowing it. Again, NATO provoked this war by sending Zelensky those weapons to keep attacking those regions. NATO's the one that wants the war to be escalated. Now, Hillary Clinton, who is also lustful for this war, told MSNBC's Rachel Maddow last week that anyone who speaks out against NATO's involvement in Ukraine against Russia, as I clearly just did, should be prosecuted.
Just as Mueller indicted a lot of Russians who were engaged in direct election interference and boosting Trump back in 2016. But I also think there are Americans who are engaged in this kind of propaganda. And whether they should be civilly or even in some cases criminally charged is something that would be a better deterrence.
Oh, bring it on, you warmongering witch. So because we talk out against NATO's. So we talk out against NATO's involvement and attacks in these regions and this provocation. And so you want to criminally prosecute those people who speak out against this treachery?
Yes, that's what she wants. So
I love how
because
she dresses like an evil empress too, like with the
I didn't
cloak.
notice. What is she wearing? Yeah, she does look a lot like Dolores Umbridge.
Emperor Palpatine.
Okay, so the context that I just provided you for the escalation of war in Ukraine, because I absolutely want it to stop. I want not another bullet sent to Ukraine. I want not another bit of support. I want the cameras to turn off and walk away from Zelensky. I do not want him to meet with any elected or unelected U.S. leader, full stop. That she wants to be prosecutable, but it is still a free country, and I still can say it. And it's clear what she wants is an escalation with Russia. Now, Russia keeps responding to this rhetoric and saying, we will back off, you back off. The United States, Europe, and NATO. Just today, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov, I'm sure I said that wrong, I apologize, said nothing regarding this position on nuclear has changed. As previously outlined by the Russian president, we can conduct such tests, but we will not hold any, given the United States refrains from such steps regarding nuclear tests. So this is the same way my sister and I used to fight when we would hold each other's hair. Like, you let go. No, you let go. Like, literally, let go. Walk away, de-escalate. If you don't do it, we won't do it. If we had prudent leaders, we would speak directly to them, not use an idiot puppet like Zelensky, but we don't. Now, even though President Trump reiterated in the debate that the war was Putin's invasion, which is false, at least he says he's willing to broker a real negotiation between Ukraine and Russia. And RFK Jr. has admitted that we violated the Minsk agreements. So at least he has one non-liar nearby.
Well, JD Vance also overnight said basically he can go pound sand, told Zelensky, like, we don't want to see you. Zelensky fired back at JD Vance.
Right.
So, and JD Vance on the campaign just a few days ago said that we absolutely should not be sending Americans money and weapons into 6,000 miles away. We should be more focused on the United States of America, not sending weapons and money to Zelensky. So that's not, that hasn't made Zelensky happy.
It's the closest we get to some kind of truth and de-escalation with our vote in this war. Now, Zelensky said, well, JD Vance, he just doesn't understand it because the deeper you look at this war, the less you understand. So in other words, if you study, you don't understand my way. So he wants you to not look at the context of this war and just keep it going. So if you vote for the Democrats in this election, your vote will extend this war, extend our debt to support it, extend the death of innocent Ukrainians, and most likely eventually be a debt to send our children abroad to fight too. Not just boys, you guys, girls too, because the updated defense budget for next year does have plans to conscript women, so pay attention. Now, I absolutely do know that if you vote for Kamala Harris, you are voting for this war and probably our children in this war. I do not know if President Trump will de-escalate the war, but at least he says that he will, and the people around him seem to understand the context and be selling it to us less. So vote for Democrats if you want to die in this war and continue to tank our economy, or maybe we have a vote to end it. I don't know. You let me know what you think.
Well, and Russia will be forced to use tactical nuclear weapons, says an advisor close to Vladimir Putin over the past 24 hours. In an interview with Times Radio, Sergei Markov said, yes, we will have to use tactical nuclear weapons if NATO strikes using long-range weapons inside of Russia. And Europe, of course, is on high alert as a result of this. So, I mean, we're playing with nuclear war. And as Trump said during the debate, you can disagree with him on any number of policies, but on that, he was the only one during that debate speaking out against stopping nuclear war. Kamala sort of like scoffed at it,
saying, well, let's try to end it. And she's like, end it. right? As
Like,
if
you
that
just wanna end it.
very idea of peace was offensive to her.
Yeah.
And you know what's crazy is if any of this would have happened to the United States, if another country would be doing what Ukraine and NATO is doing to Russia, we'd have annihilated them by now.
Well, yeah,
You know what
I
I
mean, that's a hypothetical. I don't want, we at least would have,
It's just what we do, though. It's our MO.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. Let us know what you think of that, because it continues to escalate and we have idiots who are welcoming Zelensky to keep, putting his influencer brand on blast. So,
Yeah, no demons like peace on Rumble. In our Rumble chat, Drifter's Life says no demon likes peace. Exactly. There are more bombs. There are more bombs to use than nuclear bombs, Noel says. Yeah, they're going to use up as many as they can. We used to have to make weapons in order to respond to war. Now we manufacture wars, right, in order to make weapons. So we're manufacturing these wars. We want to keep this thing going. We want to keep manipulating people into believing that somehow there's evil, that the Russians are evil, that the Syrians are evil, that the Yemenis are evil. Like, all these people are evil. So we need to have a massive military industrial complex. And then you all get played like pawns. We all get played on a chessboard, right?
Mhm.
They're playing us with this propaganda. And real people are dying right now as a result of it. And Americans are dying, by the way, and they're hiding it, what's happening in Ukraine. Americans are dying in Ukraine, but they're not going to announce it and tell you about it. All right, we've got more news to get to. Trump's bounty. The DOJ releasing the letter from Ryan Routh admitting that he couldn't pull off the assassination attempt, but now there's a $150,000 bounty out there for Trump. And why is the Department of Justice publishing this letter when they've held back on all sorts of other manifestos from the left that we can't see? Well, Donald Trump Jr. has a theory on this. We're going to talk about the bounty on Trump in just a second. Plus the German election. Germany, we just got some economic numbers on Germany just this morning. It is devastating. Germany's economy is collapsing in real time right in front of us. And they just had an election. We're going to talk all about that in mere moments. But first, I know we talk a lot about gold and silver on this show and precious metals. You just saw the interest rates last week. We saw the Federal Reserve slashing interest rates at 50 basis points, a massive admission that they need to get their hand jumping on a grenade basically right now, trying to stop inflation, doing what they can. This is an admission that the U.S. dollar, and we are ending the Bretton Woods agreements. We are ending the U.S. dollar hegemony, and we are going to see multiple rate cuts this year. That means a devaluing of the U.S. currency, and that's why there's been such a surge. Bitcoin surging, alternative currencies surging, gold, silver, as a result, because people want to be able to buy tangible, real things. And our friends at Lear Capital can help you get set up investing in precious metals inside the United States. If you just give them a call and you can have a conversation with them. And what's great about Lear is there's no pressure to buy. They'll talk with you about your options. And if you do buy gold or silver, you have a 24-hour cooling off period. If you buy coins and you want them shipped to your home, great. Call them back 24 hours and say, you know what, I changed my mind. And they really have stepped that up to make sure that you are comfortable as whatever purchase you want. If you want them shipped right to your house, you can do that. Or if you want them stored off-site in a secure location, that's what Natalie and I do. Is we have it stored off-site in a location. But you do you. You could have it. You could get a few gold bars and silver, whatever, sent right to your house. I know a lot of our viewers do that, and they store it in their gun safe. Again, you guys, you do you, whatever you're comfortable with. But now more than ever, it's to protect yourself against this declining U.S. dollar, and they can help you do it. Just give them a call, 1-800-613-3557, to ask for your free precious metals guide. They have a whole bunch of different reports you can learn about. Their gold to $3,200 an ounce. Their report on that. You can also learn how to invest in silver. All of that Lear will help you with just on the phone. Have a conversation. This letter, he is now admitting that there is a $150,000 bounty on Trump's head. Yes, Merrick Garland's DOJ promoting a $150,000 bounty on Trump's head. Ryan Routh, of course, is a CIA asset who wrote a letter months ago. And now this letter is just coming to light. I guess it was in case he didn't carry out the assassination that this letter would be revealed. Well, now it's been revealed. And the Department of Justice releasing this, U.S. District Court releasing this letter. Here it is. Dear world, this was an assassination attempt, he says, making it clear on Donald Trump. But I am so sorry I failed you. I tried my best. And again, I gave it all the gumption I could muster. It's up to you now to finish the job, he says, and I will offer $150,000 to whomever can complete the job. Everyone across the globe, from the youngest to the oldest, know that Trump is unfit to be anything, much less a U.S. president. So $150,000. Now, this is the guy that Newsweek, of course, featured in their interview with him while he was in Ukraine as a CIA asset in Ukraine, basically begging for $5. He hadn't have $5 to his name.
I love that you skipped the part where he says a U.S. president has to have moral fabric, but he's about to murder.
Right? He's like, I'm an assassin, but I really want my president to have moral fabric.
I stand for morals.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not kill. Not that one.
I'm a moral guy.
Did he write this letter beforehand just in case, or because they got him right away, so he wouldn't have time to, like, did he write it in the police car? And like, when did he write this letter?
It's unclear. What I was wondering too.
Yeah, and we don't know yet. According to ABC News, you know, the most trusted name in news, they don't know. We don't know yet exactly when this letter was written, but it was apparently written ahead of time.
Or were there two letters, like, if I die, if I succeed, you know,
right,
open
like,
A or B.
Like what Brown book?
Yes.
Or like
Choose Your Own Adventure.
like Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Allied Supreme Commander, he wrote a letter, you know, his speech.
No, I don't know.
If D-Day failed.
Okay.
And he had a letter launching D-Day, and he had a letter for, like, basically offering his resignation if D-Day failed.
Okay.
So he just had a backup, in case, right?
Yeah.
So Donald Trump Jr. has a great question. His son wants to know, what the F? Why is Kamala's DOJ publicizing Ryan Wesley Routh putting a bounty on my dad's head? Imagine, I get chills thinking about that, right? Like, regardless of your politics, whether you like Donald Trump or not, whether you like Donald Trump Jr. or not, it doesn't matter. They're human beings. I imagine, like, I can picture my son, like, thinking that about his father, right? Like, can you imagine they're just publicizing this? The DOJ publishes this letter out there for everyone to see?
Yeah, that's a little irresponsible.
A little. So in an exclusive interview, Donald Trump Jr. sat down with Daily Wire to say, now his father's life is even more at risk by releasing this bounty letter. You're putting my father's life more at risk by offering $150,000 to anyone who can kill the former president. Now, I'm sure morons out there don't believe that they're going to receive $150,000, but the idea is now set. Any sort of people who want, with this rhetoric that he's unfit to be president, all of the same language that comes from the left about this man, again, regardless of your politics. I would be saying the exact same thing if there was an assassination attempt against President Biden.
Yeah.
I would be doing the exact same story. And if the Trump's Department of Justice released the letter encouraging Americans to basically go and assassinate a president, I would be saying the same damn thing. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. It's could be construed as incitement to violence.
This is exactly why, like, the State Department has a long running statute where they don't negotiate with terrorists.
Right.
This is because it encourages them. And so then, but then they publish it. I mean, that is highly irresponsible.
Robbie Starbuck tweets this. He says, I try never to be surprised, but the Department of Justice putting out a bounty to kill Trump actually put my jaw on the floor. How the hell are we supposed to take them releasing this bounty as anything but an attempt to get President Trump killed?
And recall that it's the same Justice Department that is currently pursuing indictments against Donald Trump. So the illusion of impartiality is punctured, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, this is the same Department of Justice, just so you understand. They have a choice as to what documents they release, right? So when they're questioned as to which documents related to Trump's house, the raid at Mar-a-Lago, the DOJ released this document justifying the raid. They chose to redact key parts of it, right?
Right.
The concerns are particularly compelling in this case. Like, that's it. That's it. That's all you get. The rest of it's redacted.
Yeah.
But, when you want to release the hit on Donald Trump, here, you could read the full thing. Here's the full letter. Release it. Here it is. We'll offer $150,000. DC Drano tweeted this. So the DOJ will immediately release a bounty letter from the Florida Trump assassin offering $150,000 bounty to take out Trump, but wouldn't release the Nashville trans terrorist manifesto for over a year. The DOJ needs a massive overhaul. Right. So the trans manifesto, of course, shooting up a Christian school, and we don't get to see any of that because the left wants to protect transgender and they wanted to blame it on Christians. See how this works? Jesse Kelly tweeted this. People are shocked the DOJ publicized a $150,000 bounty on Trump's because people still haven't accepted that we already live under an evil, murderous government that will simply kill anyone who threatens its criminal enterprise. Corrupt regimes murder their enemies always. Corrupt regimes murder their enemies always. This is Trump's new plan, and they're going to kill him for it. So basically, Trump's plan, of course, is to decouple us from this globalist agenda, which I've talked about here on the show. They're actively going after them. They know that he is winning. Congressman Matt Gaetz this weekend released a bombshell story about how he has sources at the Department of Homeland Security telling us that there are 5 kill teams currently trying to take out President Trump. Listen. Sorry, guys, just give me a second.
I'll break a little news for you. I had a senior official from the Department of Homeland Security in my office before the second assassination attempt saying that what he has assessed is that there are 5 known assassination teams in the United States, 3 inspired by other governments, 2 that are here that are known domestic assassination teams. And with that, this individual was coming to me concerned that the force protection around President Trump, even prior to that second assassination attempt, was not sufficient for what it needed to be. And the coordination at that level, at the dignitary protection level, is like the bare minimum that we have to do to keep our presidents, our presidential candidates safe while they're on the trail.
So there are 5, I just want to follow up, 5 assassination teams. Are they all targeting Trump? Is it other officials?
Yes. No, I should have been clear about that. 5 teams that we know are targeting Trump. And so that raises real questions about why certain teams were being pulled off of the Trump detail and put on, for example, the Jill Biden detail. Now, we don't want anything bad to happen to Jill Biden, but at the same time, the threat envelope for her was substantially different than the threat envelope around President Trump, and it would not have necessitated pulling assets away from the Trump detail for the Jill Biden detail or the John Bolton detail or any other details that were beefed up. At the same time, the requests from the Trump detail and from the Trump campaign for more security were going unanswered.
Wow. Holy mackerel.
What's funny but not funny is that over the weekend, Axios tried to publish this hit piece about Donald Trump saying that he's doing fewer public events than he used to do on the trail, as if they're trying to tell us, well, he's slowing down. He doesn't have the audience, whatever. Mike Benz, the former State Department and cyber expert, says, because you guys keep shooting him. Like, this doesn't hold water because he clearly is at risk for some form of deep state collaboration. It's undeniable.
It's deeply, deeply troubling. And of course, I mean, we also heard reports over the weekend. We covered them this weekend as well, where there are now reports that individuals are trying to take out a Trump airplane when he's in flight using shoulder-fired missiles. I mean, you have 5 hit teams, shoulder-fired missiles. You have the DOJ publicizing a letter for a $150,000 bounty. I mean, what more evidence do you need of a deep state plan to take this guy out? As Michael Scheuer, again, ex-CIA agent Michael Scheuer wrote this weekend, he said, excuse me, first, we must assume that the 2 assassination teams that are domestic groups are simply the creatures of the Democratic Party and or the leadership of the Department of Homeland Security and the Secret Service, which appear to have already taken 3 cracks at killing Trump. He says, in other words, our federal government, deep state cabal, is basically actively trying to assassinate Trump and stop his election and stop his plans from being implemented. They are terrified of this guy. They're actively terrified of President Trump, and that's why they are trying to kill him right now. Deeply, deeply troubling. So we'll see. I want to know, I got a question for you. So he's raising he was raising $5, right? He was trying to, he had no money, Ryan Ralph.
Right.
He is like, I need like $5. He takes a first-class flight.
Mm-hmm.
First-class flight. He has a gun that's been modified. If you see the photos from the FBI that they released of his gun and all of his equipment, like a modified gun that's there. He's got all kinds of money now, apparently. Where is he getting this money from? By the way, how does he get $150,000? How is he going to fund $150,000 to complete the job?
Great
Well,
question.
He was also offering to fund people that would fight in the war. What, $1,200 a month or something like that for anybody who would like? Where's he getting the money to make that claim?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, who knows? I have an idea though.
All right. Well, we have more news to get to. Let us know what you think of those stories. We're going to talk about how the party associated with Nazis, apparently, according to the media, lost by a hair few because the German government remains in control. The party of Olaf Scholz, which has tanked the German economy and told Germans that they're all racists. So we're going to talk about what's happening in Europe. That sounds fun, right? But first, we want to tell you about our friends over at American Finance. One of my favorite European political analysts. Ralph, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, I'm going to ask you to explain who is the Alternative for Germany, or the AfD, and are they Nazis?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Natalie. Well, as you know, also from the discourse in the United States, who isn't a Nazi these days? I think everybody who's slightly to the right of the Greens is automatically a Nazi. So we throw around the term Nazi and fascist in such an inflationary ways these days. It really kind of waters down any meaningful discourse. No, they are not, right? I mean, they are a right-wing party, absolutely. And I think there is a general thrift towards the right in Germany and other parts of the world as well. But I would argue they sound more like conservatives did in the 1980s. I would argue that somebody like Ronald Reagan, particularly also economically, or Charles de Gaulle or Winston Churchill, they would immediately recognize the AfD, despite them being a German party, as a traditional conservative party. So no, they're not Nazis. They just embody something that we have discussed in the show quite often, which is that the establishment parties supported by the establishment media is no longer working for most of the people. There is a sense that everybody and everything is more important for them than Germany and the German people. And understandably, right, from Berlin to Brandenburg to Bavaria to Schleswig-Holstein, the Germans want a party, a political movement. They want institutions that they feel puts them first. So it's the Germany first version of America first in the United States.
So I guess what these headlines are insinuating is because Germany is the bad guy in World War II, they can never feel nationalistic ever again. And anytime Germans feel like they must support themselves, this could lead to a Holocaust. It's a very extreme leap to take, but it's laziness that is clickbait. That's what I think. What do you think?
No, it's clickbait. You're right. And the thing is that usually you only refer to the other side as a Nazi if you're losing the argument. I mean, full disclosure, if I would be sitting here in front of you in an SS uniform and you would say, Ralph, so where do you come from? Then maybe the argument would be valid. But usually, as we hear, Donald Trump is not a Nazi. Nigel Farage is not a Nazi. The AfD is not a Nazi party. So you could make, I'm willing to concede, you could make the argument, if there are Nazis in Germany, are they most likely to vote for the AfD? Sure, but you can say by the same token, right, that if you're on the far left, if you're a communist, if you're a Trotskyite, you're probably going to vote for the Greens or the Socialist Party, but that does not make them a Trotskyite party, right? So I think this idea to say that their program or anything of that matter is National Socialist or fascist is simply not true. And by the way, just to be very clear, if it would be true, German laws are very strict. They would be banned. So this is why this argument is so absurd, right? They say, oh, this is a Nazi party. And of course they say, well, then ban us. And they say, well, legally we can't ban you because they're de facto not a Nazi party. So this is really just an attempt. And I think we see the same in the United States as well. It's an attempt to intimidate, to blackmail voters into not voting for the parties that they actually feel would present their interests in the best possible way.
So early results are seeming to show that Chancellor Olaf Scholz party has won a slight majority, the Social Democrats. But by a hair is what we're seeing right now. And so is this a win for the chancellor? Do you think people were just do you think people actually support the chancellor and his war funding? His, he continues to support the war in Ukraine. He continues to support immigration. And so these are the things that are really harming the German people. Did the German people really vote for more of this?
No. There's a funny story. Before the election took place, the local the regional Socialist Party explicitly told Chancellor Scholz not to come to Brandenburg to campaign for them because they were afraid that he would lose them the vote. So when he now says, well, this is a huge success for me and the party, no, it's not. The party only made it barely into first place for two reasons. One is because they distanced themselves from Scholz and the federal government. And the second reason is the Greens were kicked out of parliament. So what they basically said, they said everybody who doesn't like the AfD has to vote for us because that's the only way to prevent them from coming in first place, which was factually true. But it also meant it's not that all of a sudden the socialists were super popular. It was just that people who originally wanted to vote for the Greens or the Left Party or even the Conservatives, they said, all right, this time I give my vote to the socialists. And we actually do know this because they did a poll among SPD voters after the election and said, what was the main reason you voted for the SPD? Was it the party program or was it an attempt to prevent the AfD from coming in first? And I kid you not, 75% replied, no, they only voted for the socialists to prevent the AfD from coming in first. And what this tells you in Germany in a broader sense is that many of the establishment parties, they don't have a genuine program anymore. The only program they have, and we see, by the way, the same in Austria with our right wing as well, the only program they have is we are not the AfD. And that's the reason why Germany is coming to a standstill, right? This is the reason why Germany is not working that well anymore, because if all the political parties have is we don't have a program, but at least we are not those guys, that is not how you do successful policy. So I think that on the long run, the success of the AfD will continue.
Is there something I'm missing, though, in this AfD platform that they want a slowing down of illegal immigration or immigration in general, and they don't want their economy to be destroyed by funding of war? Is there something more hateful and insidious in there that maybe I've missed because I don't speak German?
Well, it depends. I mean, there are people who say that the idea to put your own country first is hateful in itself, right? I think that you and I would not share that sentiment, but some people make the case. But if you look at the voter, I mean, this is so fascinating. If you look at the voter breakdown, the AfD came first with voters under 30. So the idea, right, that everybody who votes for the AfD is like old Nazis who cling to the last years of their life is entirely untrue. These are young people that vote for them. They came in first with workers, and they came in first with people who are self-employed. So it's basically those who are young and keep the country running who more and more shift to the AfD. And I think that's also an encouraging sign because most people want their country to work for them, and there's nothing wrong with this. We have this autoimmune disease all over the West, I would argue, where we are told to feel bad if we say that Germany should work for Germans, just as the United States should work for Americans. That is how it is supposed to be. We live in a world that consists of nation states. And in order to have a nation state, the nation part is kind of important. So this idea that is like a mind virus among, and in this case, it is true among Western elites, that we no longer exist, or that governments, that the media no longer exists to serve its people, but to serve, newcomers, immigrants, you name it, which again, does not mean that people who newly arrived to your country cannot become part of that nation within a generation, with 2 generations, right? I mean, it's a great honor. I always say when I come to the UK, the United States, it's a great honor to be in such a country and strive and work towards becoming a member of the nation. And then, of course, I'm part of it, and then the government will also work for me in the way it does for those who are already there. But primarily the point of a government, of a state, of a country is to work for its own people. And this is what the Germans want, it's what the French people want, it's what the British want, it's what the Americans want. But we have been marinated in the belief that that is somehow bad. By the way, just quick final note, nobody in India, nobody in China, nobody in Japan understands that kind of thinking. But for the Chinese, it's absolutely clear that the Chinese government, however authoritarian it might be, that it works for the Chinese people. And the same is completely obvious for the Chinese leadership. The same is the case in India. Whatever you think about the Indian government and Indian leadership, they know that their primary obligation is towards the Indian people. It's just in Europe and the United States and Australia and some other parts of the West where there's this odd idea that the primary responsibility of political parties is towards the global climate, is towards some universal human rights, is towards some, utopian, or as we would probably say, dystopian ideal, and their own people come very, very last. And I think there are people revolting against that, and I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, I agree. And so now this morning or over the weekend, French President Emmanuel Macron has formed a center-right, what they're calling center-right, again, government after a snap election forced him to do so. So this labeling, can you explain what they mean now by center-right?
I mean, let's put it this way. He put some people in charge in some fairly, I would say, prominent positions of government that are more inclined towards the right, towards the left. Probably not as far as you and I would wish for. But what you see, I think, is that despite all the clamors you hear from the media, democracy is dying, or as the Washington Post says, democracy dies in darkness. Actually, democracy is working. Right? Slowly but surely, maybe Macron is going to be the first of many. They start to realize that people want a change in policy. They want they don't just vote with their guts. They say, listen, the direction we have chosen for the country is 180 degrees from where we want the country to go. And so some of them, like an ocean liner that tries to avoid the iceberg, they're now gradually starting to change course. And I think Macron is begrudgingly doing the same. Just a quick word also again on Germany. The last regional elections in the state of Brandenburg, where the elections took place, had a voter turnout of 61%. This time they had 73%. It was the same in the other two regional elections a couple of weeks ago. So this idea that democracy is dying because of the far right or the hard right or whatever you want to name it is not true. I think the exact opposite is the case. People are very excited that they now have a choice for a party that is, as the name says in Germany, a true alternative, or the rational Nelly, the national rally. Sorry, my emotions get the better part of me. In France, right? This is a great sign. This is what makes democracy exciting, that you actually have options for new movements, new parties that propose entirely new path forward. I think this is a great sign. So don't believe the naysayers that democracy is at its end. Not at all. It's only in danger if those who are in power want to prevent anybody else from gaining power. Then it's in danger, because the essence of democracy is that new parties, new movements, new individuals can get a shot at trying their best.
Yeah. Well, thank you for breaking that down. You're right. Okay. I share your enthusiasm then, despite these headlines. You can follow Ralph, and his show on YouTube is called Hammer Time, or Ralph Scholhammer. You can find him on X as well. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to get your analysis.
Thanks, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me.
That's going to do it for us here on Redacted today. Thank you so much for taking your time on this Monday to be with us. It's getting hot, you guys. Election season is upon us. It's important to be informed voters of our electorate. So thank you for doing the homework, for showing up. We really appreciate you. Hey, don't forget, we have a daily newsletter. Usually it covers a lot of the same stories we're going to talk about in Redacted that day. We try really hard to give you original links so that you can read for yourself, so you can see for yourself, not media spin. You don't always have to agree with us. We just
Yes, Redacted is really good. I enjoy watching the show. I enjoy being part of it. And I enjoy it very, very much. There's a lot of talk about the 25th Amendment and what is happening with it. Do some research into the 25th Amendment. They're talking about what will happen if our government loses over 100 sitting members of our government, which is the House, the Senate, and the Congress. Just do a little research into it. I have been doing some research into it. And that is what would happen if we lose the president, the vice president, the House representative, and who will become sitting in office. Who will become in office, and who will become sitting president. In office. And that is interesting. Who will be sitting in office? That is very interesting. Who will be sitting in the office? who will be sitting in office. Who will be sitting there. This has been being talked about. The 25th Amendment. They're talking about this a lot lately. The Constitution addresses issues related to the presidential succession. It clarifies that the vice president becomes president if the president dies, resigns, or removed from office, paid impeachment, or whatever. But it also goes on about if the vice president becomes disabled. The vice president then declares his or her cabinet. And then the cabinet consists of Secretary of State. Now, if the vice president becomes incapable at the same time, it goes on and states who becomes the successor. Okay? Now, if the vice president becomes vacant, the president is becoming capable. If they all become vacant, it goes on and says who becomes president. And that goes down to Johnson. Okay. If Johnson cannot become president, if I can pull it up, I just had it. Okay. Okay. If the succession will go, Vice President Harris, if she cannot become okay, it will go Harris. Harris cannot, then it will go to the House Speaker. If he cannot do it, then it will go to President Pro Tem Pat Murphy. If they cannot do it, then it will go to the Secretary of the State, Anthony Blinken. Then it will go to the Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen. Then it will go to the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. Then it will go to the Attorney General, Merrick Garland. Then it will go to Secretary of the Interior, Debbie Haaland. Then it will go to the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. Secretary of Commerce, Gina. Now, this is only if they are eligible to become President of the United States. They are talking if the government becomes incapable. That's if we lose 100 people within our government. Because they are all of a sudden now talking, because of all these war going on, that we may possibly lose 100 people in our government because of all these assassination attempts. They do not know what is happening. So, because of this, they are now talking about all this stuff going on. So, familiar yourselves with this bill, which is Article 25, the 25th Amendment, which is also part of the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 6, the 12th Amendment, the 20th Amendment, and the 25th Amendment. Because if something should happen to the president, the vice president, and something happened in Congress, this provides the line of succession beyond the vice president. This was adopted in 1947. It was later revised in 2006. So there is a difference. So it's the cabinet with 15 members, the Secretary of State, that will be taking office. So, because the terrorist attack after 2001 changed a lot of the government, and people don't realize it. So, you need to think about it and become familiar with it. Okay? So, All righty, I am going to shut down the stream. I thank everybody for joining me for this prompt unto prompt live stream. But become aware of what your surroundings are and think about what's happening into the real world and what's happening in our government, because a lot of things are happening and people don't realize it. Thanks for joining me, and have a good afternoon. I'll see you later.
This is your emergency broadcast system. All civil unrest has gone global. All capital buildings and cities are under siege by the United States government to quell the domestic terrorist threat. All residents of urban neighborhoods and cities are being ordered to stay in their homes until the threats are eliminated. If you disobey orders, you could be shot on sight by rogue agents, federal forces, and domestic terrorist militias. This is your emergency broadcast system. This is a national alert. Imminent threat is nationwide. You must stay in sight of your homes or risk being shot on sight. The conspiracy is upon you. Your conspiracy friends were right all along. Now you must learn to survive. If you hear this, you are the resistance. This is your emergency broadcast system. End of broadcast.
War never changes.